Meeting to order and stand for the pledge, please. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Kate is going to be absent, and Julie said she was going to be running late.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody, I printed out the minutes that Kate sent from the last meeting, if anybody needs it. She did send them out electronically. There's 3 sets.
Okay. You leave one for Julie, I'll leave one for her.
There's 3 sets there.
My fingers don't wanna work, my brain don't wanna work, oh well. There
Thank you.
Just take them occasionally. Maybe feel so much better, because it hurt like hell to keep pulling. Have to. Guess not.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
I'll second that.
I have a concern.
Okay.
Motion to remove Articles 21, 22, and 23 at the bottom of page 1. That was made, but the way these minutes are written, it implies that this meeting, that this group so voted unanimously to do so, and I don't recall any such vote. The Board of Selectmen voted unanimously, but I don't recall
No, she's right,
file-
you're right.
filing a vote on that.
Well, it
So-
says town meeting warrant made by Diane and Haley Brooks.
And seconded, but, yeah, I think that.
Oh, it's
maybe a-
misleading, okay.
It's misleading, it should just be, so voted unanimously by the selectmen, So, I'd be okay if we just maybe had that,
So you want a correction or an
A
addition?
clarification that it wasn't this board that voted on that. I don't think there was anything else that was voted on that.
Are you open for discussion, Mr. Chairman?
Not.
Well, I have a question too.
Okay, I will accept it with that clarification. Is there anything else on the
Yes,
minutes?
just for clarification, I see that the advisory committee ended up voting to end up putting the words in long-range capital planning committee. That would, just seeing that, are we prepared as a group that they can end up having a substitute motion with that wording put in?
We could do that at pre-town, or agree to that?
We could do that at a pre-town. We had to actually write up a substitute motion and say that we'll go along with the substitute motion.
Right, it'll have to be in, blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
in writing, and.
Yeah. That way there is you have a substitute motion at the pre-town.
So, and they did send out the final warrant
Yes,
electronically, and, okay, so the minutes. That clarification for the articles 21, 22, 23, and the motion to amend will require a substitute motion.
should be so voted by unanimously by selectmen.
For the Articles 21, 22, and 23.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that what you're looking
Yeah.
for? Gordon?
Yeah, that's all.
Okay. I'll send that back to Kate with that item.
She'll love me for that.
Is that?
She'll love me for that
Oh,
one, yeah.
I was just thinking the same thing.
Okay, the next thing on the agenda is a report of the committee. And I put this on there to ask members if, besides our recommendations, usually it's first, second, third article, it's usually right at the beginning, where there is a motion to allow committees of the town to allow them to make a report to town meeting.
Yep.
Generally, I don't think there are many that do, but
This committee has done that in the past.
it, yeah, it's under the consent article, Article 2 on the town warrant. So if we want to make a report such as express our disagreement or philosophical differences with regards to the revenue, or things like that.
I would, I hear where you're coming from, and I kind of agree with that, Mr. Chairman, because we have had difficulty getting information. The warrant has not been received in a timely manner according to the bylaw. We have been given
2 years in a row.
numerous numbers, as I'm sure Paul will end up attesting to, that he's got numbers multiple times, including those that he received from the administrator. And I think we need to take and end up spelling that out, the fact that all our recommendations, because of all of this going on, are predicated on the information that we received, and it's scattered all over, and it's been difficult for us to end up, as a board, do our job.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I think the thing we should do is have Paul tell us how his project has come along and where we stand before we decide what we're gonna put down for a report. See where we stand, see how things look, and by then maybe we'll have a good grasp of how close we are or how far away we are to what they're projecting.
Well, after last night's meeting, it seems that there is about $100,000 deficit. Am I correct in saying that, Mr. Bennett?
The, and in that email today, if everybody got a chance to read, I didn't get a chance to read it till 10
One.
minutes ago. Originally, there was an article on here to transfer, to support the town budget and spending plan for 18 with 2 transfers. One was a one-time revenue use, and the other was the transfer of $325,000 from the ambulance receipts to the general fund to support the fire department. Last month, and I did bring this up at a meeting, I got the general ledger budget from the accountant, and I spoke with her about it, and she rolled me through how much was in there at that time, and what the third quarter looked like it would do. And then she told me this is what we would have to collect in the last quarter by June 30th to have enough money in there for that 325,000, which meant at that time, there was not gonna be the 325 in that account come town meeting. That was discussed last night at the selectmen's meeting after the audit report. And I left the meeting with the impression that they were gonna present that at the town meeting, and if anybody asked the question, what's the general ledger balance of that fund right now, today? They would have to tell them that it was about 225,000, and then they would be faced with either town meeting agreeing to vote that deficit in the spending, or they would have to cut that night 100,000 from the fire department. And at the end of the meeting, they said they were gonna send these articles with some changes, questions, to town council to come up with a final warrant. And I believe in that package of emails from the town administrator, I guess somehow they must have spoke with the DOR again, or town council, because it appears they're not gonna do that. They can't go into town meeting
No, how can
with,
you
with
can't?
a, well,
Well,
Just-
on page 6 of the document that he sent out this afternoon, it shows a deficit of $99,856.
so
So
they-
the budget is a deficit.
because of that issue.
Yep.
I took it upon myself this morning to send an email to the Director of Accounts from the DOR, just letting her know of what had been discussed about that very issue. And I asked the question and said I didn't expect to get an answer, but my question is this: is that a proper way to go with a deficit? To ask town meeting to approve a budget that has a deficit built into it? I didn't get an answer, of course, but I didn't expect one, but I just wanted to let the Director of Accounts know that. Because after what we were told last night by the auditor and all the advice that they gave, that if you look at the contracts on the town website, it's like $28,000 per year. So that's like about 120,000, give or take, not give or take, it's 8,000 less, that's what, 112,000 or so. It's over $100,000, according to what they have on the town website. And they, the man gave them advice, that firm gave the selectmen a lot of advice, gave them down a lot of advice, and it seems like they're just to me, looking at that, asking the town to vote a deficit, I don't think that's a smart thing to do.
Going into town meeting, we should not have a deficit. The administrator has said that you can end up having a deficit, but
So I
all the
believe,
documentation I have seen on, as far as DOR, et cetera, says you should have a balanced budget, no deficit.
my thoughts, hence my reason for sending that.
You know,
I believe they're going to, somewhere in here, they're going to go along with the transfer of the existing, whatever's in that fund, and then do a supplemental fix in, whenever they have the special in the fall.
you know, if they don't clean up their act, it isn't gonna be us on their back, it's gonna be the state. They're gonna watch them like a hawk.
As I said, I think the auditing firm gave, and he stated it last night, they pretty much
Don't
put
you
it
understand?
in writing, a plan to follow. we have another town to the north of us, Winchington, who they had to go to the state on 3.5 million or so, and he said it. You know, they looked at it, they made a list, boom, boom, boom. I was actually reading some of the steps they did and the way they did it and the articles they did, with the selectmen and the finance committee, voting, putting articles in front of the people at town meeting to, you know, do this, to fix this. And that was last year, and I guess they're doing some more of it the same this year. They're apparently following the advice.
Well, they think we can fix ourselves. I don't think we can.
Well, overall, last night's meeting, I thought was quite comprehensive. The only contention that I have is that on 252, it said that there was a biohazard, which there was not. There was 7 pilot holes drilled because I was there, and there was 2 at that particular meeting of Mr. Skelton, Mr. Columbus, Mr. O'Brien, Mr. Kurt Machete, Mr. Page, and I believe Debbie Dennis was also on there, where they ended up deciding on the 7 pilot holes, and they found nothing on those pilot holes. So that's one of the reasons I pointed out that they had originally gone for $1.9 million for that building, and when the bids came in, they came in at $3.4 million. And that same group came back at one of the meetings to say that they would lower the cost, and they wanted to go ahead. And I had copies of it that the advisory board had, and just showed them the fact that, and I ended up saying to them at that particular time, as chairman, that the bids were much higher, and if that's what the people wanted, and they basically voted that down.
So,
I'd like to hear Paul explain what he's dug up this last week or so.
I'm sorry? I didn't hear that.
Jeffrey?
okay, so as far as the report of the committee,
I would like to
first of all,
take
does the committee wish to do that?
Yeah, I think we should. And if they listen, they listen. If they don't, they don't. But we do our due diligence in trying to be honest with them. I think we owe the people of this town that.
Because we have had some issues, even dating back to
Well,
last
they
year.
know what our issues are. They chose not to deal with them, so.
I mean, as far as like Will had said, the bylaw's not followed. It was, I don't know, 9 months or so to get the first copy of a DE1 with the debt schedule. And again, that was publicly put out by the auditing firm that,
We should start next year's budget.
the work, well,
Right off.
no, the work of the treasurer collector was less than stellar. I take that basically said it was not up to par,
Not even close.
not being done.
Certain aspects of the town government dealing with some of this stuff seems to be broken, and it was pretty well pointed out at the audit last night. And that's part of it, is the documentation that's provided to this committee, who, by bylaw, and by a number of things, and let me just read something, what this committee is, and what the origin was. The origin of the Municipal Finance Committee, Advisory Committee, in Massachusetts began in 1870, when a group of Quincy citizens band together to restore financial order in their municipality, creating Commonwealth's first financial committee. In 1910, the Massachusetts General Court acknowledged the need for municipal finance state aid with the adoption of Chapter 130, Section 2, and the Acts of 1910. This inserted Chapter 39, Section 16 into the Massachusetts General Law. And I mean, I've gathered some information because one of the selectmen at one of the meetings when we said what our process was, basically said, well, what communities? Well,
Was that John?
that was basically from the town of Adams. I have what the Department of Revenue has as our role in the budgeting process. If you look at other communities such as Groton, Plymouth, Bedford, I mean, the list goes on. And these are some of these communities around us, and some of them, Ashby is another one. Some of these communities are large, some of them are smaller, Avon, Weston, and they all say the same thing, including Orange, which I have on here. I mean, I didn't make copies of this, but I've been gathering this information over a period of time, looking up as to what our responsibilities are and what we're supposed to be getting from the process. And it doesn't seem like the last 3 years that has transpired.
We haven't had decent leadership to start with. That'll kill you every time. And if you don't have good leadership, the selectmen don't know what they're doing. So, you know, if they're not, nobody teaches them how to be a selectman. There's no school. If they don't take part in town government before they become a selectman, they have no idea of what they're supposed to do. They don't go look for the selectman's handbook. You know, that's the way it is.
Actually, in 2014, when the MMA updated the Selectmen's Handbook, every selectman in the state received a thumb drive with a copy of it.
Yeah, well, God only knows if anybody will look at them.
Well, I'm just saying, they made that available
Well, like
to the,
Julie, that's one of the things she said at that meeting Will and I went to. She didn't know how to be a selectman.
Well, even in the Selectmen's Handbook, it basically has in this, at one particular point, that the advisory or finance committee is the watchdog, the official town watchdog. In fact, on Dartmouth, they almost copied it verbatim, and it says the finance committee serves as the town's official financial watchdog.
But the stuff that the people from the audit company dealt with are procedures that are different than anything we deal with. And you'd have to be a certified accountant or treasurer to know all the ins and outs. I really am upset with the DOR because they knew we were having problems back in 2010, 11. They knew there were problems. They should not have let us go that long without an audit. I don't know why that happened, but there's no excuse for it. I question that whole deal.
I was really surprised at one particular point, the auditor pointed out that there was monies taken out for feasibility that wasn't accounted for in the amount of $550,000 that wasn't reported. That sounds like about the same amount of money that
We were short that year.
we were short in 14.
You know what?
I don't know if
And they
it's-
don't know where it went?
They never reported it. He basically said there was a lack of reporting and mismanagement and leadership.
But he didn't say, he said there wasn't any theft.
Well, I don't know, you're not gonna find any theft if you can't find out what happened to the money. If there's just nothing there, how can you know if there's any theft?
Wasn't me. But I'd like to know how Paul made out with his report.
So I mean, I would think that we would wanna take and end up having some type of summation at, presentation at that particular time when that article comes up.
But that, I wanna know what he came up with,
Okay,
so we
okay.
can write a report.
We'll,
I think some of the information that Paul has would be maybe better served when we talk about the article on the budget versus what we went through and not getting the information at the very beginning. I mean, that's my thought,
which, right, it went, because it's the second article on the warrant.
right.
I
mean,
know, but-
So a report of the committee would be,
All right. What's new? We didn't get any more help this year than we did the year before.
well, the bylaw was not passed, I mean, not followed.
50 changes and,
The longevity
weeks.
of getting the debt, we asked for the department heads' individual budget
We never received
submissions
those.
this year.
Yep.
We were told we would get them electronically. We never got them paper anywhere, otherwise. I believe at one meeting they were told, well, it's in that book, it's in that budget book. But that's not what we asked for, and
I
that's not
mean-
what we were told we would get.
One of the things that we're supposed to be allowed to do is to take and participate in establishing the guidelines for the budget. And also the format, it's in the bylaw. The conflict that, and I think maybe that would probably be the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, is to talk about the fact that there is a conflict in the bylaws that was created in FY14, that where the selectmen have taken over and basically said that they're gonna control on how the budgeting is done without any input. And the bylaw for the advisory committee has been on the books going way back, almost from inception of that article. Very minor changes where we end up getting the information and having the individual budgets from the departments, which, okay, it's in a binder, but there's no way for us to look at those electronically and make changes that they can see if we wanna make individual recommendations to a budget. We don't have that capacity to do that because of how it's being presented now, this particular year. I mean, those are just some things that I see as issues. And the fact that the bylaw conflict was presented to town council, who rendered a thing saying that it would be up to the two boards to bring that to town meeting and let the town meeting decide on how they wanted to do it.
Yeah, I believe that Paul Durensis, town council, did suggest that the advisory and the selectmen should get together and come up with an understanding, an agreement,
Right.
something,
And if not, go to the,
versus having a big fight on town meeting floor.
right.
Agreed, yeah.
And that hasn't happened. That's been brought up a couple of times at the selectmen's meeting.
I think right now everyone's just trying to get through the budget season again, and that's been the focus. Just get through, and it's,
Well, getting
Hopefully
through the
this-
budget season is one thing, but I think some of that has been brought up even before we really got into the budget process.
So.
Well, you know, if they don't understand, they're under the gun to get it together. They don't understand after last night, God help them, that's all I can say. They have to learn to live within their means, or the state will come banging on the door, because they're not gonna put up with a lot of foolishness. They should have come in here before
So,
people wanted them.
is there any particular format, or do you think just a
Just right off,
a few things
Letter.
written out?
Yeah.
From the advisory committee, and then we could,
If they end up letting us present slides like what happened last night, that would probably be more effective, is that they can end up putting some information down.
What is it that we want to present? You
Well,
know, I
that's-
mean, what information is it? What points are we trying to make here? You know, yeah, there's a conflict. We know there's been a conflict between who's supposed to be doing the budget planning process. But, you know, and maybe we want to make that point, you know, and bring it to the town meeting and say, hey, we still have this unresolved. But do we really have a problem with the way the budget was done? I mean, I think it was a pretty good process from what I've seen. I
other
don't-
than the timeline,
Mhm.
other than the timeline, again, and it was reiterated last night again, that, you know, you should come up with guidelines, and you should come up with policies that state this, and how this should happen, and this happen. Well, we already have some of that in place,
they don't
and they're
follow.
not following that. And I get your
Okay.
point, whether it's, you know, do you wanna beat a dead horse, or,
Yeah, I think we have to be somewhat careful in being aggressive to stop the progress that's been made. This year, I think we had a much better relationship with the Board of Selectmen in meetings. We were able to have joint meetings, more productive meetings in that, albeit we all know that they were late in when we should have been having them. But I think that we're starting to see maybe a step in the right direction with that.
Yep.
You know, as far as the entire budget process, you know, that needs to be, you know, worked out and ironed out as to how that's working. Definitely who's doing that and the different roles. We here, you know, should point out the concerns we still see within a report, but point out the steps and put some positive in that report. You know, we've seen, we've improved this, this, and this, so we maybe list the improvements, and these are the areas that we feel still need to be worked on. In other words, so we've improved our ability to work with the selectmen, and, you know, we find that the booklet, you know, the information that they provided was very informative. This needs now to be worked on, that the timeline needs to be within the standards.
Mhm.
And the budget, you know, the conflict in the town laws still needs to be resolved.
Okay.
You know, I
Do-
think something
do-
to that effect. Can
do
you
you
very
feel-
summarize
I
that?
mean, I've watched some of the things. Do you feel that when the meeting between this committee and the selectmen, that you had inputs to individual budgets that you could end up bringing up and discussing with the selectmen, and they would end up saying, okay, I see your point, and having a discussion? I don't think I saw that per se.
I saw this as step one. You know, we missed, or I missed some of the revenue meetings. Some of that communication came out. That'd be another thing that needs to be improved. Communication still needs to be worked on. If we, you know, they felt that the communication was a little, what we brought forth, they felt was something they had already dealt with. But clearly it needed to be dealt with, because they came back and said, yes, there's an issue here. you know, maybe because it was the first one, there was definitely a learning curve. You know, this committee was on, at least I was, maybe not the committee, but I was unwilling at the things to say, you know, I'm unwilling to support this at this time if you keep it that way. You know, maybe we should have been doing some votes during that same thing and say, can we? But we were, in my mind, I was still in the mindset in the past where we had gone through this line item by line item by line item as a committee. I think this year it was more individual, and we hadn't had a chance to really sit down and talk. So we might need to have a little of both of that. And we have to be willing as a committee to do like they did at the joint meeting and say, you know, if we're gonna have these joint meetings, we as a committee also have to be able to make motions and go ahead and have a process and say, you know, as this committee, you know, we make a motion that we don't approve this, or we do approve this. And now that they can see right there, okay, this committee now is here, we're here, and then maybe we could have worked to find a better middle ground. You know, we spend a lot of time on revenue because it's been so important, and we've seen some issues there. That when they got into the expenses, I was still in the process of revenue, which was way too late to be dealing with that, you know?
Well, again, on the expenses side, that's what I was referring to. I thought it was a good process. We had all those joint meetings, and whether or not they would take our input is one thing, but we were there and had the opportunity
Yeah.
to ask the questions of the department heads and make our points,
Yeah.
okay? So from an expense standpoint, I thought it was a pretty good process. They didn't have that process around the revenue side. So, I mean, what they put out in January versus what they put out in the budget book are completely different numbers. And if they had spent the same amount of attention on the revenue side as they did on the expenses, I think we would have avoided some of these questions. And, you know, you gotta bear in mind too that the audit was going on, and there were some questions about, you know, what were the right revenue numbers? Even, I read in the report, they said they even did the recap sheets incorrectly in some years. So I could see there was an awful lot of flex going on, you know,
Well,
around
one
the
of the
revenue.
reasons why the recap sheets have been, especially since 13, have been done incorrectly is that most of the department heads hadn't done anything on the recap sheets until the 14 budget. Why do I know that? Because the previous accountant did all the recap sheets along with the town the town coordinator at that particular time. They were doing the recap sheet and presenting that and telling basically department heads, sign here, from what I can gather from information that first year, and said, wow, that's really the responsibility of this particular department head, and it wasn't being done. I mean, I know that there was some conversations around that with different department heads, and they were saying, we've never done this before.
There is a memo stating just that from the town accountant, Fred Aponte, who's the accountant still the town accountant in Harvard, I believe. But I do have that. He sent out an email when they were doing the crossover from cities and town into Vadar and the problems that they, were running into, I mean, then. Because when Certified Public Accountant Scott Sawyer left, that was his program, Cities and Towns, and he said, you have a year before it's gonna be shut down, it's not gonna work. So part of the year was still using that, and then we were getting Vadar and changing over, and for instance, like the town clerk and the assessor, deputy assessor, and the treasurer, they were doing this for the first time. And there is an email memo, stating that, pointing out that, hey, some of these issues are happening, but this is why. And that was back in 13, 14 years.
The transition from cities and towns to Vadar was a total nightmare. If you want to talk about something that went really bad, that went really bad because they didn't actually start it at the beginning of the year. They were into the year and they were using the two systems, and then they tried to merge them. Did not work very well. And then it was trying to go back and recreate all of that information in Vadar, and things weren't going well.
It's
Things
hard
weren't
to know
going well.
what the original accountant was doing too. He had his own way of doing things, nice way to put it. And he wasn't about to help us. What did he want to charge us?
5,000.
We didn't have any money.
So, my take is,
The way I
Um,
figure it, until we get a full-time town administrator with a big baseball bat, we're not gonna get a lot of changes.
for our report, my take is,
Things could have gone better, but they weren't as bad as they could have been.
I believe, it seems the consensus is to be less confrontational and have sort of like a pro-con type of memo or
I think if they had worked
statement to
on
the committee
Yeah.
of, hey, during this past year,
we made
carry over
gains.
from last year, this improved, this was better, this was better.
Mhm.
However, we still see
Issues.
and experience these cons or
Issues.
negativity stuff.
Opportunities for improvement.
Our communications, following the bylaws, timelines,
And a
the committee having input
how do you say that word?
and,
Difference.
The committee's role and responsibilities haven't, even though they're clearly defined, we have not necessarily been able to follow them.
Well, I don't think it's
that's-
clearly defined. We have that conflict. So that's gotta be resolved.
and.
Who's gonna be responsible for the budget planning process, for the management of it?
Well, again, there's, that's one of the things we have, is under Article 4
Yep.
of
Yep.
the advisory committee,
Says we go.
section 5 or 6.
Yep.
Says that we're supposed to have access to this, to add a column on a form that we designate. And then, in 2013, at that town meeting, I believe it was 13. Yeah. Create a town administrator was gonna do this, 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 and this. It's under Article 3, Section 4.
Yep.
Then the following year, in 2014, and I wasn't at that town meeting, so, but from what I read, and this is where the interesting thing comes up that town council pointed out, they did, it started out, they were gonna change the duties of the advisory committee. And there was a substitute motion made for Article 3, Section 4. The town administrator will do the budget, boom, boom, boom. The original Section 4 of the bylaws created the town administrator position.
Yep.
Without rescinding a town meeting vote in 1998, where the town meeting accepted Mass General Law, Chapter 41, Section 23C, which creates executive secretary, a board of selectmen, appointment for a term of 1 or 3 years. The appointment shall not be made unless the selectmen retain the right to dismiss. That's in the annual town report, it's in the town meeting record. So in 13, when they voted to create a town administrator, I don't even know if that was done correctly, because you have a town meeting vote then, And now you just have an addition to a bylaw saying want to have a town administrator. And at the end of that, it was to change the wording in the personnel policy, which had town coordinator in charge of this, and the personnel bylaw, strike the word town coordinator, insert town administrator. Okay, so let's say that was done properly, just for giggles. So you have an addition to the bylaw that says we have a town administrator, and he's gonna do this, this, and this, and whatever the selectmen
Mhm.
designate his authority to do. The selectman is still ultimately responsible, but he has the authority to, boom, boom, act for them in all these procedures. Fine. That's bylaw. Well, the following year, they replace that. And it says the town administrator will do the budget. And, be responsible for this, this, and this. So suddenly you have the bylaw, a section of the bylaw that created the town administrator replaced with something that says he'll do the budget. We brought this up, and Will's brought this to the attention of the board, and we had a discussion, and we voted to ask town council about this. And the Mass General Law, Chapter 39, Section 16, I think?
3916.
That says all towns having more than $1 million in valuation will have a finance committee, advisory committee, or warrant committee. The advisory committee has a strength over the finance committee in that we advise on all town warrant articles, rather than being limited to financial. And I think that has kind of changed a little bit. I think financial, I think it's Athol, they have a finance and warrant committee, the one in the same. So they, instead of being called advisory, it's a finance and warrant. So they advise on all the same stuff. Different title, same duty, really. So we asked town council that. We're saying, hey, they have this Mass General Law, and it says unless you have a bylaw, stating something else, the advisory committee will, or finance committee will prepare the budget and everything. Sort of what our bylaw says under Article 4. But then this Section 4 comes along in Article 3. And, the point was made, hey, originally Section 4 said this, now they have a Section 4 that says that, so we have conflicting bylaws. What does town council think? And he opined back that clearly in 13 you did a Section 4 change. Then in 14, Section 4 got changed, but so we asked, did they mean to have a Section 4A? In other words, you created town administrator and he has this, 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 and this duties, and now you want to add this to it. That's not what the bylaw presently says, and that's not what town meeting voted on. So he suggested that the advisory committee and the board of selectmen get together and kick this around and come up with some sort of agreement. Who's gonna do what, and blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
And then, get that fixed. And if you can't come to an agreement, then go to town meeting and let town meeting decide and have this big duke out at town meeting.
Okay.
It's been ignored.
So are we taking the position that we don't want it to be ignored any longer? And we're gonna bring it up as one of the,
I think that's one of the, besides the pro and cons, there is this issue
Yep.
Okay.
that we feel should be dealt with.
Even going further back than that, as you heard me say, the town accountant and town coordinator would previously do the budget. The last budget that was done was in 13 by them. There was a change in town coordinators, and the accountant left. So that left a vacuum as to how the budget was gonna be formulated in 14. Fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you looked at it, advisory started to do their job under the bylaw, saying, let's gather the information and create something. And they did. They went to the sources for information, the treasurer collector, accountant, etc., and got information as to what numbers do we put in here. Unfortunately, there was a change in treasurers at that time. Inexperienced accountant, inexperienced treasurer. Same thing in 15, they still had inexperienced treasurer. So why the selectmen at that particular time didn't take it up, I have no idea. But when there was discussions with some of the selectmen saying, you need to take and end up initiating the budget process through the town administrator and yourselves, and pass that on, and we should be involved in that. Well, they created, as you heard, they created another bylaw in 14 that created a conflict.
Okay.
And that has not truly been resolved per se. It should have been, but it has never been.
I mean, again, they paid for advice, and they got advice. I mean, the town paid for advice, town council.
And
He
he
gave
told us work it
advice.
out, and we haven't,
And it hasn't been addressed.
and it's gotta be
And
resolved one way or
It has been brought
another.
up,
Okay, but
at public meeting, it has been brought up
See, even one
in
of the,
private, one-on-one with the administrator, and it's like, well, that's just a little technical thing.
even in this budget, if you look at it per se, no matter how it's done, okay, because he's got it by department, where's the column where our recommendation for that particular department?
Okay.
There is none. There is none. Even on those communities that do an omnibus, but they also give the detail, there is a column for their finance or advisory committee to put their recommendation as to the amount.
Okay.
That's not happening this year.
Back to who owns the budget process.
Yeah.
I'd like to get your opinions about, do you think that is the role of the advisory committee? That we have to own that process? Or do we advise on it?
What do you mean by own the process?
I'm saying having to put the documents together, we set up the meetings, we meet with the department heads. We basically do all of the planning that the town administrator did.
The town administrator has the responsibility of going out to all the departments and gather that budget information and put it into a document.
Okay,
He should get some input from the advisory as well as the selectmen on guidelines as to whether it should be level funded, 1% up, 1% down, et cetera, before he starts that process.
okay,
The bylaws actually call for us to be able to end up spelling out how we want that information to us. We did give them a document, an Excel sheet,
Yeah.
that all you had to do is plug in the information, and it would calculate it and show the account numbers. That was put aside, and the document you see in the manual was created with using an outside resource
okay.
that the administrator had pulled together.
Okay, so our process versus the process that they used.
Right, he basically said, I'm not gonna use yours, and just, regardless of what the bylaw said, I'm not gonna take and end up using any input from you.
Okay.
I mean, that's my impression of what he said to us.
Well, I'm starting to hear some more specific things then, points that we wanna make. First of all, we gotta resolve what the role is. Okay, and are we saying we own that budget planning process, start to finish? That we should have the template?
No, we don't own
should
it
do-
we don't own it from start to finish. We own input to it at the start, and when it's handed off from the selectmen to us, we own the recommendations that are given to at the town.
Okay.
At the town meeting. If you look at the document that I was talking about from all the other communities, they actually say in there about recommendations to the town. that the budget that's presented to the town, even if you look at the financial handbook, it says that the document that's handed to the at town meeting is the recommended budget along with the administrator, along with the Board of Selectmen, and our recommendation. And here's our recommendation to the town. Now, it's up to the town to choose our recommendation or the selectmen's recommendation as to how they wanna go. And if the selectmen don't agree with our process, and vice versa, on even individual line items, they can end up making a substitute motion for either budgets or line items. I mean, that's the process that's used by many other communities. And it's just, for whatever reason, it's not being done here.
What, in some communities, ahead of town meeting, you'll get a booklet with all the articles and what the advisory board recommends, so you can sit down and look at them. Jeffrey brought one in from Hubbardston. I had an old one from Templeton that they used to use. You got a little booklet, and you walked into town hall, and it'd say Article 1, and then it would say approved by the advisory board or denied. It would, so that you could look at it before you even got to town meeting.
See, one of the things for, why the advisory committee, as you heard me say back in 1870, is because the community didn't feel, going way back, that they weren't being, that the townspeople weren't being heard. We represent the townspeople. We look at the budgets and we make our recommendations on the budgets that were formulated by basically the executive branch, meaning the selectmen and the administrator. And we present that to the legislation, which is the townspeople. Because they can't come to look at everything per se and gather the information like we meet. I mean, you got 8,000 people, they're not gonna take it end up, you're not gonna get 8,000 people to come look at the documentation that the selectmen have generated or the administrator. That's our job. So they should be looking to us so they can go through that budget, scrutinize it, and make recommendations, bottom line. And present that at town, here's our recommendations based upon what the administrator did and what the Board of Selectmen did. And let the townspeople at that particular time choose the budget either by individual items or in its entirety. I mean, to me, that's the process in its simplest form. And for some reason, when the bylaw was changed, in fact, in 14, they initially wanted to take and end up putting that portion of it under the advisory committee's portion of the bylaw. And I said, no, if you're going to have the administrator and the selectmen being responsible for initiating and gathering the budget information, it should be under town government and not necessarily under advisory. That's not our responsibility. Our responsibility was never to take and end up going off to each department head and saying, what do you want for your budget? We have input to that, guidelines and documents, but that's not our function, is to go out to the individual department heads. That's the administrator and a Board of Selectmen.
And that's what they did this year.
But they never ended up getting our inputs as to the guidelines and documentation.
Okay? So we've got timeline. It's gotta start earlier. We need to have
Yes,
input to it in terms of what the recommendations are going to be. You're talking about at the department level, right? You know, they voted on each department. We should have a column represented that shows what we voted.
right.
Okay, so that's two specific recommendations right there. Do we need the process done earlier, whatever that is, or started earlier? And that we definitely need to have a column on there that, you know, where we've reviewed with them each department head's presentation, and, you know, just like the TA did, he had his recommended amount for each department, we would have ours.
In 14 and 15, when, unfortunately, we had to spearhead it, because the selectmen and with the, at that time, I think, we didn't have an administrator, we had just a coordinator, and the coordinator wasn't responsible for. He did give us the document to work with, said, here's a document. He was not given the responsibility to go out and get it from the departments. He did send it out with, he said, here's the document that you need to fill out for the budget. And that process was not something that we probably should have got involved in. We probably should have sat back as a committee in 14 and 15 and not taken the lead. But unfortunately, the town wouldn't have had a budget.
Right. So there was a void, and you stepped forward and provided some leadership.
Right.
Yeah. But I'm saying, we've made progress, right? We seem to be on the right track now. We have a town administrator, he may be an interim one, but he's very knowledgeable, and I think he did put a good process in place on the budget planning. I liked the document that you put together, Will. I thought that was very comprehensive. They chose to go in a different direction. That was his role and responsibility as he was hired to do the job, and he went off and did it, and we participated in it. Maybe not to the extent that we wanted to, or by bylaw, we had a right to.
Yep.
But that's our recommendation then. You know, did you like the document that they put together? The budget book seemed pretty comprehensive, and,
I would prefer to take and see it electronic.
oh, I
thought
agree.
by making 15 documents in hard copy per se and handing them out
Yeah.
was,
You
know,
Another good recommendation.
I mean, I like the budget book with the backup documentation he included.
right, I like that.
I
for
thought
sure.
that was very useful.
Yeah.
But when it comes to actually reviewing the budget as a whole, an electronic is much nicer if it's set up properly, because you could see, as you said, you know, this part I could see taking this much out, and boom, 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 it totals for you.
Yeah, because you could
But
end up,
we can develop something like that ourselves for the next one, now that, if they're using the same format, because now we know what the accounts are, so we could modify what we've used in the past.
well, I don't understand that the accountant said that
They
that's
had
gonna
them in
change
spreadsheets.
next year.
Yeah, but if they're changing it, that's why we didn't end up with it, because we got the information so late, we were never able to.
See,
So I
in-
think timing is
in
really the biggest thing that I would say that in all the years that I've been here, if I was to put one big thing, it's the time of the budget process. They're starting too late. I mean, you can't hit them with every single problem. You gotta prioritize, take 2 or 3 big ones. And if I was to say the biggest one, it's the time that they get started and get information.
Mhm.
If they could get this stuff started like the state says in their recommendations,
They start late in the process.
you know,
Okay.
so I think that's the biggest thing is, this needs to be done in a more timely fashion. We should not be, behind the state schedule. Our goal should be to be ahead of the state schedule.
Okay.
What was the amazing thing is that when the advisory committee was doing the budget in 14 and 15, we ended up having the individual departments come in and review their budgets. They came in. And what I liked to take it, I liked the fact that there was copies of some of the backup information, but that information was asked at those meetings when we met with the departments. The actual, anytime we met with a department, there was a question, why did you do this? And they provided information as to why they had that particular thing in there.
But again, I couldn't attend all those sessions, you know, the joint meetings that we had either, but I went to 2 of them, and that was exactly the process that we went through.
Right,
All right, the department head was there, they presented their budget, they answered any specific
Right.
questions that were brought up.
And we got a chance
So-
to also ask them the questions at that time, which was more efficient for the department heads rather than go to 2 meetings,
Right.
you know?
well, I'm not against having joint meetings with the selectmen and ask questions.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I couldn't attend those as a health issues. But if I had attended those, I would've had a lot of questions,
Yeah,
Yeah.
very specific questions. Because I had gone through this process,
sure.
and maybe the backup information was there, but still, electronically, if you have it there, and we decide that we wanna take and end up doing something a little bit different, we don't agree with a certain department as to what they have in the budget, electronically, we can make that change and see what happens for the overall budget.
Mhm.
And see what the impact is. And in 15, that worked out quite well. I think we as a group sat down, and I think you were on at that particular time, weren't you? When all of us individually from the advisory committee made recommendations on different stuff. We sat there with all our individual ones and put up, and we saw what the impact was overall. And that's how we came up with a budget for 15. And made changes individually. And in 15, one of the primary things was to take and end up addressing the snow and ice deficit. Or that was 16, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In 16, excuse me, it was 16.
I want them to have a budget that's realistic, that they can live with and stay within. I don't want them spending money that we don't get. That's all I care about. I don't care what the hell they spend it on, as long as they stay within the guidelines. This
Well-
having deficits at the end of the year, the man said, yes, last night, you are not supposed to overspend your budget.
And they were.
But if they boost revenue, so the budget looks better and the money doesn't come in, you're wasted, the whole thing's gone. It's absolutely a loss.
The big question, and I think, is as far as the budget process, and I have to agree with Kate, is the first step that you do is you look at the revenue side.
I just, yeah, it's just
They have,
crazy.
we tried to do that back in 15, and we started that as a committee, is to take and project ahead. And unfortunately, things changed in 16, and that was dropped, per se. There was a discussion with the interim administrator, Mr. Markle, about doing a 3-year projection as far as going forward. And I think I sent that to everybody, because I found that it was actually on the state website, where you would put the information in for a couple of years, and it would project out 3 years. So that you would have the revenue, et cetera, and it would be done from the actuals. Not from a recap, or not from the levy.
Mhm.
It was the actual numbers.
No, that's what we gotta say.
Mr. Chairman, can you just read the list of pros and cons, and maybe we have more than enough and we can
Well,
move on?
Yeah.
I have down as pros things that I've heard, was the joint meetings, where we sat there with the selectmen, and we got, if you're able to attend a meeting, and I missed one, you have to ask them questions directly.
And it was more efficient, right? Because the department heads didn't have to go to several different meetings. It was,
Right, and, well, you got to ask them the question, and everybody would hear the questions.
Yep.
The budget presentation, and it's the book itself, I like that better than, I forget how many copies of an electronic spreadsheet we got last year.
Paper the time.
And then, I just think this was a better start, and a more informative. I mean, you do have to flip back and forth, but it's all there. And hard paper copies, you don't go in and click and make a change, because now you can say, hey, this is what you have here.
you had a paper
So,
trail.
Right, and, you can get really nitty-picky like I might, but, the cost of the paper and the production of it, but overall, I think it was a good it's vast improvement over,
Last year,
well, many years.
You know, well, I'd like to take and end up seeing something similar to what he has. He had the different tabs for all the departments on one Excel sheet. Is take the Excel sheet that we had created and do that and have all of that information roll up into the actual budget and put it into the different columns for everything. Is you could see the individuals on one Excel sheet, and then it would roll it up as the overall budget. As you put in information into one department, it would actually put it over onto a master sheet for that department as well as the rest of them. So you would end up seeing what the bottom line is and see what the impact is.
So, and on the con side, was communication. There's room for improvement. You know, we asked for things and we were told we would get it, and we really
Never
didn't.
did.
And at the meetings, the joint meetings, even though that was a good start, and talking with the department heads was good, but I think, me personally, and I think I've maybe heard this, maybe not, but between this committee and the selectmen, sometimes it kinda seemed like it was one way, or it was, you know, be there but don't speak too loud. But we do need, we started communication, just we need to improve it.
So
The
what what I just heard you say was, we participated, but we weren't able to contribute like we thought we
It
should.
didn't seem like we were.
Yeah.
We were
Well,
able
they
to
were, it
really-
was their meeting.
to
Not our
contribute
meeting.
much, because I think the few times we made points, and, you know, like, and it was like, well, you know, it's a communication that started, but it needs to be better.
I looked at it as a joint meeting, but it was actually run by the selectmen.
And
And the level of participation, I would have expected more of a
Give and take.
dialogue
More give and
between the
take.
two.
I think that's a growing trend, you know, for us to grow in. Having now experienced that, as a committee, we need to be comfortable enough to say, whether whoever's running it, that we can make a motion and our committee can vote on things at the same time. There was nothing preventing us from doing it. We just didn't step up to the plate and do it, to be honest.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
You know, I think maybe because it was new to us and we just kinda sat there. And that's why I think it's on the ability to grow, but some of that, I think would have to be placed on myself. You know, I had an opportunity to make motions and ask more questions, like you said, and,
I
you know.
didn't feel like, we were there, but I didn't feel like we were really included. We were there.
Yeah, we were
So we
there,
were there.
but that, as much as we may have felt that way, that feeling we translated in our actions.
Yeah.
Whereas if we had just put our actions and said, it's a joint meeting, we have every right to
Yeah.
make motions and to do these things, and to have discussion, we could have done so.
But I saw some
Yeah.
questions being asked by some of the members, and it was less than stellar of an answer. I'm trying to think and end up being,
Yeah, there's,
Mike,
and
that happens in every meeting. We've had that happen in these meetings. But yeah, you know, sometimes, and the chairman sometimes maybe was moving on more, but again, that could have related into, you know, that there was a lot of issues this year that,
well, I think they're gonna find out they
So
need
the
us.
the next one, and it's kind of a combination of things, one has to do with the other, is the bylaw of when we are supposed to get the warrant articles and stuff by April 10th. And it goes along with the timeline,
Mhm.
which, again, this year especially, I mean, last year it started in January, but I mean, it really didn't amount to, because they kept just like putting us off and putting stuff off, and, well, we're
The
gonna,
day
you know.
before town
So the
meeting.
timeline and the bylaw, I believe, and as was said last night, we should start working on 19 as soon as, you know,
Done.
this year is done, town meeting and everything is done, and you get that stuff done, start talking and thinking about 19. Because it's already been stated that this 18 thing is not gonna be a good foundation for 19 because it has some issues in it. And then input, as far as, where our recommendations, a column is, and it goes back to the other thing that you were talking about earlier. And asking for things and kind of being put off. I mean, we requested the department heads' raw stuff, and we never got that in electronically. I mean, we did get to see at a meeting and ask some
Mhm.
department head, I guess if you made all the meetings, you got to talk to just about all the department heads. But we were kind of working off what was in the budget book versus what, it would've been nice to see what the department heads originally gave to the town administrator and asked for versus what is in there. Maybe it's the same, maybe it's not, but that.
My understanding is that he ended up giving those documents out, got feedback and sat with each individual person and then changed things.
So,
Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my understanding of what the process was.
there was an electronic copy going around to department heads about their input and stuff. So for pros, it was like, the joint meeting was good, it was a good start. The Board of Selectmen and the Advisory Committee actually sitting down together and certainly talking more than we did last year. And the budget presentation was much better. And maybe we need, recommendation for a column in a final spreadsheet for our input or whatever. And the cons were the communication still needs to improve, the timeline and the following of the bylaws, and a little more input from our part.
Instead of pros and cons, I think we should end up saying, these are the things that we thought worked well, and these are the things that needed improvement.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just, I like
Improvements,
that for
yeah.
my
Right.
little notation to
I think that's
present stuff.
more than enough, it might almost be too much, but maybe that could be put together as, a presentation on that and brought to us at the next meeting or that, or is there somebody that's good with language? I know I'm not a good wordsmith on putting something together.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put together a slide, I'm glad to do that, if you just wanna, send me the notes or the minutes, and I'll work from that and put it into a slide for the next session.
Maybe if you send out ahead of time, if someone has inputs, they could share
Yeah.
them,
Okay.
Obviously, we can't do a meeting that way, but we can still
Yeah.
send over our thoughts.
But the one message that I've been hearing from this committee since I joined was, we have to live within our means. And that meant more emphasis on the revenue side.
Yeah.
And if that means doing the revenue projections earlier as the first step in the process, I think we should be very clear that's one of our recommendations.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and there's no reason that, I don't, now having been involved, I think the revenue projections should be done way earlier. Yeah, we don't know what we're getting from the state, but we should know our numbers and have them verified. The heck, I don't see why we couldn't be able to do it by fall meeting.
Well, one of the-
Like Will said, you can do projections. There's models out there where you can, put in 3 years.
One of the things that we
and-
did, and I think it's very positive, is we did financial trend monitoring, which a lot of communities do this. And we projected those, we showed what it was in the past and whether it was a positive or negative trend.
Yeah.
Whether it was favorable, unfavorable. Those are the type of things that, even for the revenue, should take place.
Yeah.
But the key elements,
Is
we weren't able to
numbers.
get our arms around, Will. I mean, we looked at what the tax levy was and how that was projected, we looked at the excise tax and so forth. And exactly what what we know we can project. But it was the actual tax receipts that was so difficult to get. And that's what tells us, what is our tax collection rate? Do we have a problem here or not? And those are the types of things you need to identify way up front and come up with a game plan, how you're gonna, what numbers you're gonna use for your revenue, and, you know, how are you gonna fix the problem? We were saying that we were around 92%. When we first looked at this in December, we said our collection rate appeared to us to be around 92%.
Yeah.
And that was our recommendation back then. And if you go based on what the auditors put together, we're very close to 97%. You know, so it all comes down to having the data, having the information available.
It comes down to the physiological as how you approach it. If you look at the individual years, the collection rate, and we saw that at the end of 16, where it actually showed 92% against 17 on the property tax. Okay, I think what they're doing is, not only are they taking 16, they're taking 15, 14, and all those previous years, and saying, okay, that's our total receipts, which gives you a different number, a much higher number as far as percentage of revenue received than what you actually got against the actual years, 16.
Right. But auditors come in and they look at, you know, what you've collected, and they know what the breakdown is, and they do make some holdback rules, if you will, and say, well, some of this was for the prior year, okay? Your first quarter collection, some of that could have been for the prior year, and they can make, you know, make projections based on that,
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, we just need to focus on that up front. That's gotta be a major bullet, in my opinion, and our recommendation is focus on the revenue up front. Agree to what the numbers
Yeah.
really are.
That's part of the timeline,
Yeah.
getting that done.
And
And-
then, how they spend it is within, a lot of it is within their ability. But don't tell me that we are bringing in more than we are, because that what happened last year. Remarkable jacked the budget up. And all of a sudden this year, that money's not rolling in the door. So now we have a deficit.
Well, if we put the right focus and
We have
attention
to-
on
we
the
have to
revenue and the
clean that whole
numbers.
One of
and-
the, one of the key
Agrees.
things that I got out of the third quarter, this is from the accountant, the assessor, and the collector, treasurer collector.
Yeah.
Under the snow and ice, the statement was put in. As all departments are still on a spending freeze, we are hoping to find enough in accounts to cover this deficit. Which means they have had a freeze on for probably since the second quarter. If you have a freeze, that means you're not spending your expenditures like you were planned. Why? Because you're not getting the revenue that you anticipated. I mean, that's my assumption.
Well,
Why hold back on the expenses if you think the revenue is coming in at the rate you actually predicted?
The only other thing that we're gonna have to, like, sort of keep in the back of the brain box is, we have an interim town administrator.
Mhm.
We have no idea if he's gonna be interim for a long haul, you know, for another year or two, whatever their plan is. Or if we are gonna actually maybe get
The real one.
a full-time administrator, and then we're gonna have to deal with their philosophy. So,
I mean, after
I
last,
think get
I
too
think-
caught up on how,
The
you know,
details.
Carter did it, because, at least in theory, if they follow the advice of the auditing firm, go find yourself, a full-time administrator, because he kept pointing that out, you've had an interim, some retired guy filling his
We
thing.
got
and thing.
burned by
But,
Markle, in my
um,
opinion.
So, but if they do finally hire a full-time administrator, he may have a different philosophy and a different approach, and you gotta expect that. So the next budget cycle that we get into, you know, him may start, you know, be different.
Yeah, but that's
Hopefully
fine.
not, but,
That's fine, as long as he lives within our means.
but again, that's what I'm saying. He may have a different philosophy,
Fine.
and it may be totally opposite of ours, or it may be more in agreement of it.
Well,
The only thing we
well,
can
like-
do is, with the selectmen, is say, hey, try to infringe on them the point that, hey, we should be looking at revenue more than expenses, because that seems to be the issue.
Well, I'm not saying more than, but at least as much emphasis on the revenue.
Yes.
You know, to begin with. And that should be at the beginning of the process, because that tells us what we've got to work
And
with.
hopefully we start,
Yeah.
as was suggested, you know,
It was pretty plain that they better clean
soon,
up their
start
act.
soon.
Go ahead.
I think we have enough items on that list. Unless somebody else has more stuff,
So-
I'd ask the chairman if
To,
maybe we move on to the next item.
I will, you get Nancy.
I am, I'm looking at, we got a lot of lists, we got a lot on our agenda still.
Yes.
One,
So I'll try to get a written thing together, if that's fine,
We'll get past
And-
Julie and she can help you do it.
and email that out.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, one final point I'd like to take and make that came out of the audit, I don't know if anybody else caught it, was the fact that the auditor made this comment.
Well, actually,
And it was very concerning to me because,
if we're done with, so we're good with the
Yep.
beginning, coming up with something for a report of the committee, correct?
yes, okay.
Because, well, the next thing on the agenda is the audit
Oh, okay.
report, so, which,
The thing that concerned me was the fact that he said, because there's so many problems in the community, the likelihood of us getting a good qualified individual to come in was probably not very good. I mean, that's what I got out of his thing, is saying, you have to pay well, but even if you pay well, you're not liable to get somebody if they see that the community has so many problems. They're not likely to take it on to come into that community.
That may have played a role in why the prior individual this year they chose didn't pan out.
Ran down the road, you mean?
Well, no, he hadn't even been an administrator
He
anywhere.
had no
But
experience.
regardless, they offered him a position,
I know, but
and they couldn't work out the details. We don't know, what the cause of that per se is, but, it's a challenge, that really an experienced person is what you need, but being that they know what they're getting into, are they gonna be willing to take it on?
Huh.
It's
Right.
gonna be hard.
Right, and the same thing,
Until that's something beyond this committee, until the selectmen are on the same page, they're gonna be challenged finding one. There's a lot of, you don't expect them to agree on everything, but there needs to be some key things that they know how to work with the administrator.
I think not only the administrator, but your treasurer collector, because there were so many points under the treasurer collector, it seems that department may have a shakeup. And to get a qualified individual might be difficult. I mean, when we ended up looking at that, we went out to, I guess, at least 8 or 10 communities to see if they had treasurer collector, and seeing what their pay was. And it was pegged at the average for that particular time for a treasurer collector. It doesn't sound like, in today's market, that's still the same. I don't know. I haven't gone out and looked at what other towns' treasurer collectors are
I
getting.
think Ashburnham is like near the 80,000 range.
If you want a
they're
really,
up.
really, really good one, yes, probably. But if you want one for a small community, like a lot of small communities, you may not have to take and pay the 80,000.
I'm just saying, I looked at Ashburnham and that was
Yeah.
their.
He basically, I mean, it scared me when he said, if you got somebody that's coming in and wants the job, and they've been in another community, they're moving on. For whatever reason, they're not doing the job there, or they're not necessarily the person that you want for your community.
Yeah,
No,
I mean, when he
actually-
said that, I went, oh my God.
But actually, if you watch other communities and when town managers and stuff
They
move
move.
on, they tend to move on to move up to, more, maybe more responsibility or better pay. And also on the flip side is change of board of selectmen,
Yeah.
you change philosophy.
Yep.
1 minute, hey, our emphasis is on this, the next time you get a group of 3 or a group of 2 in a 3-member board, and hey, we're gonna do, this. And, I mean, which happened in Winchendon with the town manager, you got a couple, new selectmen in there, and they got the ants on something, and then they were in conflict, and,
Yep.
I mean, he
Can
was
get pretty
removed, but,
nasty.
Well, that
he left,
happened-
but that kinda happens
Very.
more than with just, problems, it just happens as a matter of
Life.
the Board of Selectmen changes,
Mhm.
a philosophy or their ideas change, and that conflicts with the guy that they hire.
Yep.
So it's like, I can either stay and adjust and deal with this, or you know what? There's somebody at community hiring and they're a little more pay, or they kinda more in my line with my
More of a
thoughts,
challenge.
so they go there, so that's one of those things.
That actually happened in Athol, whereby they had themselves a town manager, and they made a requirement that he had to live in town, so he got an apartment in town, and his family didn't wanna move because the kids were in school and his wife had a job there, and they let him go because his family wasn't living in town, so that philosophy,
So it's, it can be, problems with the pay, but it can just as well be, it's not like he's elected, he's appointed by,
Right.
by the Board of Selectmen, and when that changes, so that could affect as much, at least in my opinion, that could affect it as much as, the pay or, problems in town. Sometimes there's people that say, they got a lot of problems, I'm gonna go in there and fix that, they want the challenge. I think I can go in there and fix all this stuff. So, my takeaway was though, when you have a lot of turnovers with like a treasurer, collector, or this or that, boom, 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 they get in there.
but the audit report itself, when you look at the audit report, I think was, with a few mistakes, as I said earlier, was quite comprehensive. And the thing that I looked at and why they're showing a little over $1 million as far as potential free cash to go against the deficit that they have, is that if in 15, we had not had a tax title sale of about $500,000 and sold 252 for almost $700,000. $700,000, if we had not generated that in cash, would probably only give us about $350,000 of free cash to go against a deficit. So our deficit would have been much, much larger. And I look at that and saying, wow, we were lucky that we created that, having that. I have to take it in, as much as I don't necessarily agree with the budgeting process of that interim administrator at that time, he did go out to a company and had that tax title sale, which created cash. It was available to go against the deficit.
And that was, I will say, that was not, I was on the Board of Selectmen at that time, and that was, Talladge, the firm that did that, had sent out a feeler to the then town coordinator, Jeff Ritter, and he mentioned it to me, hey, we got this firm, and they do this, and they gave me a call. And they must search, database and see, wow, they got a lot of potential back taxes owed, and worth a look to make, a profit. And I met them at the Mass Municipal Association conference. And I spoke with them and said, hey, come on in, come to the selectmen's meeting, we'll talk about this and stuff, but that was not intentional. I mean, that wasn't a planned, that was just, they came, they gave the town a call and said, hey, this is what we do, are you interested in it? I spoke to them at the MMA conference, and they came, and when last night, when the auditor, when he said, well, you have this much money, and it's by chance, that tax title sale was just a chance. I mean, that's not something that was, as a board of selectmen, we sought out and planned on doing and said, hey, this is what we can do. We talked about, we had about $800,000 in back taxes owed and stuff, but that was not a planned move on our part.
Happened.
I'm telling you, they happened to call, and I said, and we talked about it, and I ran into him at the MMA, and said, hey,
Is that part of our ongoing,
hey, I invited
strategy
him to-
now?
invite him to the selectmen's meeting.
Yep.
I said, hey, come make a presentation, because I think this
Some
could
communities
work
do
for
that
us.
on an ongoing basis.
Yeah,
Every few years, they have tax title.
that's what I'm asking. Are we doing that now? Is it an ongoing
No,
process?
no. One of the things that needs to be addressed somehow is the fact we've got about a half a dozen pieces of property, large, some of them are very large, like Temple Stewart's and the paper mill, who we don't collect any money from. I mean, you can say 100% or 97%, but we're not really getting that money. We're probably owed $500,000 or more by these companies and these pieces of property, but we can't afford as a community to put them in tax title, and nor will the tax title company take them because of the hazardous waste or the hazardous stuff that has to be dealt with. And the community at some point has to end up saying, let's go to the DEP, get some of this resolved. And you can't put houses on property like that, but you can end up creating it into commercial and industrial areas.
Right, and that's part of the reason why that tax title company, Tallage, they come in and they looked at the ones, hey, A, B, C, D, and E, we'll go for them, because it's a business, they make money at doing it. They pay all the taxes and the penalties, then they go to the owners of the property and say, by the way, now you owe us, not the town, and we have the money to go to land court.
Well, it says here,
But the
Well,
Temple
that's
Stewart
the thing.
property and some of those, they're in bankruptcy, they have liens on them, there's like, that's a big headache. And that's why the whole 800 and something thousand, they didn't go after.
Mhm.
Because they're a business, and they look at the stuff and they say, we'll take this one, this one, this one, this one. We don't want nothing to do with the brownfield stuff, cause it's just,
Sure.
the profit motive, and it's not there, and that's what
Monday
they
night.
do.
There was-
Eaton talked about this.
Yep.
And what he said is it literally takes years to get these things cleaned up, which is really too bad, because there's a huge piece of property and it's got a railroad siding on it.
Right?
But we don't have anybody that can go look for grants. Gardeners cleaned up some of their sites, some of their old mill sites that were polluted.
You go through the state, and it's a brownfield grants and stuff, but it's a plan, it does take a while, and they come in and they sort of clean it up. It's not 100% stuff, but it gets stamped by the DEP that it's now clean for, like the Garboo site next to the Tops, the Timpani Plaza. You can't put houses or anything
No.
in there, because it's it's particularly that spot, it's too dirty. I mean, there's mercury, there's this, because it was a scrapyard.
Because you don't want to end up doing that, because the town of Orange took a gasoline station a number of years ago, and the DEP came in, and the cleanup for that gas station was on the community, because they had taken it for tax title.
So there are 16 outstanding real estate accounts that they've sent notices to, and they are gonna put them on tax title. But you can't expect that money to be included in money that, in our revenue, because it's really not, it's like a one-time.
What is, do you, on that report, does it say what the annual tax rate is for, that property up there in Baldenville, the, Stewart Temple?
I gave Jeffrey that,
Because that's something that, you know, each year that tax rate goes up by 2.5%. And we basically can guarantee that for now, we aren't gonna see that money this year.
That's right.
Eventually, you know, they look at eventually, taxes, you do get your money, because although if you go through the process of taking it, you may not get it when it comes time to sell it, but in theory, you're gonna get your money.
they have thousands of dollars
You know.
worth of interest that they've charged us.
I'm just looking at, when we're looking at our annual budget, you know,
I don't think they
we know
include
right
that.
off the top that income, even though it's part of the levy, isn't gonna be there.
Right, that part of, it's not gonna come in.
Yeah.
One of the things, when they did go out for tax title, and as you heard, they collected X amount, and in some properties, they said, the tax title company said, we're not gonna take it. There was a flurry in here of a number of property owners who didn't wanna lose their property, who hadn't paid taxes for a number of years,
Some of
that
them-
came in and paid them off.
Yeah, there was some that came in, 30,000, 40,000, they owed taxes for years and years.
Hmm.
And,
Figured nothing would happen.
and that is another thing that it's proven that cities and towns, communities regularly take their delinquent property taxes and put them in the paper, and some people say, oh, you shouldn't do that, you embarrass people, but it's a proven thing that just by, and there's a record of this statistically, that just by a city or a town stating, we're gonna put this stuff in the paper, before, on this such and such a date, like May 16th,
They beat it.
Templeton is gonna publish its delinquent taxpayers in the Gardner News.
Yep.
Before that is published, that list has to get adjusted, because there are people that come in, I don't want my name in the paper, and they pay. And then another percentage, once it's in the paper and the time has passed and stuff, they have, that year, they start the process, another percentage pays. And the amount of money that is generated just by doing that, you don't go to land court, the cost you have is the advertising cost in the
Right.
paper.
Mhm.
And communities regularly do this and actually bring in delinquent tax revenue.
That was done in 15 with the tax title. In addition to the tax title, it brought in, it was a substantial amount of money, that, as I recall, because people came in and they paid their back taxes. And I think it was over 100,000, it was in excess of 100,000. So on top of the tax title, that was additional monies.
So before we digress too much, within the audit reports, I know Paul and Gordon wasn't there, you have your books and you to look over and stuff. Of interest, I think, to this committee, really, there's something we should pay attention to was, and he stated this, there was
Look at my book.
22 or 23 issues with the treasurer's office. He
Yeah.
just listed stuff, and, he said there's a problem there. And where it relates to us is when we request things such as the DE1.
So like page 28. or
I
something like
requested
that.
a budget to actual document, and I got one time from a selectman. It was last year in March. Well, about 3 months or 4 months, so I went to the treasurer and requested that similar document for the school, the elementary school, the MSBA, supposed to have the appropriation of what's been spent and what's been promised and blah, blah, blah. The response I got, the email response I got from the treasurer's office, I don't have any of that paperwork. Try Kelly, the town accountant. Kelly said, Jeff, I can give you the general ledger balance, okay, we started with 550 and now there's 50,000 in there, or overspent by this much, but I don't have that. The secretary in the selectman's office, she's doing that. I contacted her. Yeah, I've been doing that, but I haven't got to that because I haven't had time. May try to contact the school. And that there shows me how they were able to be in a deficit of the amount of money they're in, because even after, throw 14 out, 15, 16, and 17, where we've had town administrators, experienced people, we've told we've got a treasurer collector and a town accountant, an assessor, all of this finance stuff, we're doing things the right way. There still wasn't tracking
Mhm.
the biggest debt
Right.
potential project in the town's history. And I think that's real of interest. One of the things that caught my attention with the audit report is the problems that, in that, and that goes with, the lack of tracking and accountability of the town's debt and
Spending this money,
investments and what we have for cash.
Yeah,
And if things are recorded properly, because if you have that many, a page and a half of issues with one office, that's something I think.
that was one of the key
select
things that I
needs to be
saw.
jumped on.
In addition to that, the fact that there's a deficit of $1.4 million based upon the school, where we are with the school, is that money is,
How did
in
they do
deficit.
that? I don't
and
get
in
it.
addition to that, there was accounts within the budget over a number of years that were almost $800,000 in deficit and overspending for individual departments. So you're talking $2.2 million in deficits that have to be made up. And last night, they talked about borrowing $5 million against the school deficit, paying that off, and keeping the rest of the money as how they say, as establishing credit.
So, yeah, we'll give you a little credit card, and if you're good, then we'll give you a bigger one, but nobody asked how long that's gonna take.
The thing that scares me about that is that if we had all of this mismanagement
You can
and
give
no
them more
oversight on all this other debt in past years, what's made it got better? So you're gonna have $3.6 million sitting out there. Somebody's gonna take and end up saying, oh, look at this account, we can use that to take and end up paying off this.
money. Yeah.
I mean,
because-
it scares me to take and think about that.
And you don't know how long it's gonna take to get from A to B.
The auditor, his comment and recommendation was, and he talked about, now that the audits are done, we talked with Southwest, the financial advisor of the town, is also the financial advisor of the school and so forth, the school district. But he said you may be able to go out for a small loan of $5 million. He said, but don't spend that. He said, just borrow that money to show bonding agents and potential bond buyers that, hey, Templeton can now borrow money. And that's what he said, he said, you borrow, don't spend it. Just use that as a means while you work on this stuff and get your books closed. Get your documentation, balance sheet, this and that, the tax recap sheet done. Get your free cash certified, have a fall meeting, deal with the deficit, whatever deficit shortfalls you have. Once the DOR certifies your unallocated funds, take that money and, deal with all the deficits and all your shortage issues and get that cleaned up. And then if the citizens petition for town meeting fails and the school project is still on, and come December or January, you should be able to go out for the bond for the $47 million. But at the selectmen's meeting after the presentation,
Excuse me.
as Will
Thank you.
stated, the town administrator spoke of, if they go out and borrow, after town meeting, go out and borrow, short-term, it's a bond anticipation note, $5 million, take 1.4 of that and pay off that deficit.
No, and
Keep the,
that deficit is for what's been spent on the school project so
Yes.
far? Okay,
and then keep the rest. He said, you're not gonna be able to go out and do construction bidding or anything like that. He said, but his words, if there's been any design changes, if there's any building code changes or anything, these little things that come up as you approach, if everything goes, smooth, and you go out to borrow the 47 million, if any building code changes that happen and you have to pay for updates on your plans, you would use that leftover 3.5 million to cover that. Which seems to contradict the advice given by the auditor when he said, you could go out
Don't
and borrow
spend it.
that 5 million, but don't
Yeah.
spend it. Just do that to show the creditors that, hey, Templeton's back in the game, they can borrow money.
See, one of the things that was asked was, what's the interest rate gonna be?
yeah,
When you borrow on a band, which is a bond in this anticipated note, it's short-term. You can end up, it's usually for a year. You can end up extending it for a second year. And what you do is you only pay off the interest. And at the end of the term, you have to pay it all off. Or you have to go out and get an actual bond
yeah.
against it.
But that's a couple of the things that came out, but like I said, I thought personally, for this committee to really watch was the glaring report of the problems in the treasurer's office. I mean, he was pretty blunt about it, and he says, hey, like 23 items. They're all listed in there, in the management letter.
Mhm.
And then they have all the different years, to go through there. He went through it, it was kind of pretty quick. I mean, he did take some questions and stuff, but, it wasn't in real detail, but he went over the management letter pretty good, which was the part that,
Okay, so there is a deficit.
Yes.
there is, yeah.
And that's gotta be addressed. And that, what he said is that what is out there is potential, and I say potential free cash should go against the deficit.
How,
Well,
did he,
okay.
did they specify what, at the end of the multiple years of audits, the balance would be, free cash versus deficit? I mean, where does that?
He was talked a little over, and it's on one of the slides, it's a little over,
I was trying to find that one.
It's in
so-
the management letter, I believe.
Yeah.
If you look at the tab, the
Right there.
management letter.
right there. It's a little over $1 million.
So by the time it's done, we actually end up with a potential free cash a little over $1 million.
No,
Deficit.
you have to pay the deficit out of that.
What was the deficit? That's what I'm saying. What is the balance? I don't wanna know the growth, I wanna know the
No,
net at the
okay,
time
that's
it's
like
done.
a 783,000.
Yeah, almost 800,000. So you're gonna end up
about
with maybe
two-
$200,000,
But he
maybe.
gave us credit for having money in stabilization, and that would not have been there if it wasn't for us.
Yeah,
So, because that's really, the key when it comes down to it. Yeah, you can have a deficit, but what does it balance out to? So, personally, I think it'd be great if the town actually tried to find out where what happened in some of those years. But is it worth spending more money on, or do you move on? I mean,
Well, actually, they
he did say,
pointed
Not to-
out there was some problems
Yeah.
in 2009 and 10, and I guess there was a couple of options. One could go back and start in 9 and start fixing things, and just deal with these little deficits each year. But he said, but the DOR thought that it would be better if you just add up all the deficits. This is your bill. It's gonna come out of your unallocated funds or free cash, and just pay it off in
Move
one
on.
lump thing.
move on.
And just close the door,
Yeah,
which personally I'm
it
not
still
real happy
sounded
about,
like the
but
accountant still had to take and clear up some stuff even after this audit on some issues on those years.
It sounds like the cemetery, perpetual care things.
There were
Yep.
still a few things they were working on, and then there's 17. So the guideline, they said that the goals that the auditor has set, that the selectmen should do is, close fiscal 17 as quickly as possible, and they're shooting for mid-August.
Yep.
And have all the, the balance sheets, get all that stuff done, get it submitted.
I don't know what the
The
heck they're gonna
DOR
do with no treasurer.
The DOR will,
Kelly can't do
hopefully the
everything.
DOR will then look at the paperwork, certified to free cash by like September, October or something.
Right.
Get the recap sheet and then have a fall town meeting and,
Late September,
Deal
early
with
November.
everything.
And it was-
and then whatever's left over,
See how far they
hopefully
did
it
the
goes
whole
into,
between now and fall.
savings, but you
And,
never know.
I think that this, report obviously gonna shed light on, give us a lot of data and information that we can review. And one of the things that I would like to see this committee take out of this is identifying areas within this audit that in the future we can, some of these I've already noticed, we've already did bring up as issues, but that we can be identifying as issues, and areas that maybe we didn't see in the past that we need to be watching for. Obviously, I don't think we're gonna find those necessarily tonight, but I think as we study through this, and, for the next, probably the next committee, to really focus on this report and take it, and find out what can be done from an advisory's point to help.
They gotta find a treasurer real quick, because
That's
Kelly
that's
can't-
nothing that we can do, though.
No,
That's
I know,
nothing
not
that's
us,
them.
but the town,
That's,
because Kelly
Yeah.
can't do it all herself, she's got her hands full
Yeah.
doing what she's done. And without somebody in there, I mean, the things will just pile up.
And that was the thing on the capital,
Huh?
the capital
You have a
planning.
certified treasurer collector sitting right in that office,
Oh, I know,
assistant.
I know.
For those who weren't there, or didn't stick around, if you didn't stick around for the selectmen's meeting afterwards, they talked about the capital planning committee, and they had a little discussion about putting the treasurer collector on there, ex officio and this and that, and then says, well, we had problems with the treasurer collector, they wanted to put like the town accountant on there, but you have a triangle of conflict with, you have the selectman, Doug Morrison, then his wife is the COA, and his sister is the town accountant, so if the accountant's gonna be, first, you're putting too much on the accountant, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then second of all, on capital planning, if there's an item for the council on the aging, and Doug recuses himself, I
And she
mean,
does,
the
yeah.
accountant is, not saying it would happen or anything, but, and it was the position they were appointing, not the individual, the position of treasurer collector. And they did ultimately decide that would be the way they would go, with that bylaw that they're,
Well,
Throw it in.
talking about that bylaw, it's kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but as far as the bylaw for capital planning, they had the selectmen and the advisory on, and then they had members of the community. My concern is that we've had, on this present capital planning, one position that's always been for somebody on the community. And this is the first year in 5 years that they filled it. And one of our members is the one that talked the individual to go in and submit his application for it.
Alright.
So if we could, if the selectmen didn't fill that position for 5 years or better,
There was no need, there was no.
how can they
excuse for
fill
that.
3 of them?
well, you can't force, I mean, that's a member of the community, you gotta step up. I don't care if it's a selectman, it's us, we can't force anybody. I can't say, Carol Garvey, you're gonna be on capital planning committee, cause we need a citizen at large, and she's gonna tell me to go pound sand. Because if you don't want to
But
do
no, they
it,
didn't attempt to get one, I don't think, and they let the guy that should have
It's-
been there.
you know, it's an at-large position, and finally there was somebody who stepped up and volunteered to do it.
Yep.
Right, and going out to get 3 people from the community,
It's probably no different actually than getting somebody from the planning board, the school committee, and the other one that had always been,
that those are the ones.
you know. Again, the bylaw said, hey, planning board, you gotta supply somebody. Nobody on the planning board wants to volunteer. Well, you can't force them.
Keep somebody on that doesn't show up, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, nobody else is volunteering to step up, so it really doesn't matter. It does
Well,
make
my
a headache.
understanding is that
You
somebody,
can actually force them, because you can make it a requirement of in the bylaws of, say, the chairperson, to be the member, or their appointee, you know, so you could if you wanted to, and now that's
Well,
part
they
of their
found out
position,
they
and
were
then
in
if
a
they
jam
didn't
'cause
do
they
it,
didn't
they
have a
would
quorum. That's
be
why
able
they
to be,
got their act
you know.
together.
They could be like us. We'll just move our meeting to the same day as them, and, you know, you have a conflicting thing. It's like sometime the budget subcommittee of the school, you know, members gotta choose.
Yeah.
It's like when I was on the board of selectmen, I wanna go to this meeting, that meeting, that meeting. There's 4 meetings on the same night, you gotta pick like, you know, I really should go to that one. I'd like to go to that one, so you flip a coin at which one you go to. It's really comes down to the people in the community give a damn about their town and wanna, you know, make this work. And sometimes I think that's why the selectmen end up being on so many committees, or, you know, people from here, or certain groups, because nobody else steps up, so everybody just says, you know, hey, we're gonna make it, you know, 2 members from here. And even on the board of selectmen there, it's like, who's gonna volunteer for this committee? Cause you got like 12 committees that you need two selectmen on each one. Who's volunteering for this? Well, who's not here tonight? Who pencil, you know, I mean,
Yep.
it really comes down, I think, that, you know, people need to volunteer. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe you need to,
Hey, rolling right along,
Go
it's
some
getting
road.
late.
never late. We
Never
got
late.
all the time in the
I'm too
world.
old for this.
So, for those of us that were there and those, you know, we heard pretty much the presentation. If you weren't there, the book it's an interesting read, and I wanna flip through it again and again.
Yep.
Just for, like I said,
there's
like,
a lot of
Give it
good
a nice
like Gordon
information.
said, for future planning, there's things to look at, and maybe whoever's on the committee after town meeting, hopefully, you know, they could take some things from there and pick a few and focus in.
This is like, all his recommendations that they can correct these things are just like the DOR report of 2009. If the selectmen and as leadership of this community don't address these things, they won't happen.
That's right, that's what I said last
Yeah.
night.
Hey, it took over a year to get the policies and procedures of the Board of Selectmen agreed, because some members didn't like a few words, and some members, it just, you know.
Just a
All right,
question, was there a line item in this year's budget to cover the audit for 2017?
I don't even know if there's money there to cover the 4 that were just done.
Yes, there is.
Well,
In past years, they put them in there, and my understanding is they ended up,
If they
28,000 a year,
mess-
Julie told
yes.
me.
Yeah, that's what the contract says. Plus, if there was any, there's room, there's a statement in there that if they have to do this or this, they're entitled to more money.
Would that be in the select board's budget? Is that where it would-
yes.
Yeah,
Well,
that's what it would, it would,
It's been between the accountant and the selectmen, depending on what year.
yeah, they put money,
Way back, it was over 300,000 we spent, so God only knows now. We could have done a lot of good with that
there
money.
was, there was a couple of years back, they put a lot of money in the accountant's office expense.
Right. And they came to us for a large amount of money to pay Abrams to correct the books for 13 and 14.
Yeah, and to still assist in
It's a lot of money that's
questions
been,
and stuff.
been allocated and spent unwisely.
But
Could've hired
Because we
somebody
didn't do things the right way.
So, the audit reports are what they are, and like I said, it was bad, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. There were some good points in there.
I have to say something to the people watching this. I was upset with the Gardner News because it made it sound like nothing worked right in this building, and that's not true. We have good people. We have people that work hard, that you can depend on. So they should not have painted everybody with the same brush, because there are too many good people that do work hard here, and you don't feel like it's everybody. Two people out of the bunch created problems, not everybody. You have to know that.
So,
That bothered me.
like I said, everybody's got a book.
Yeah.
And y'all can look through it and do what. The 2018 budget, I believe they've made their final, or I hope,
You wanna bet?
well, according to the emails and stuff, the paperwork they sent, it seems like they've set the warrant articles final, barring any little changes. And in the memo, the issues that are gonna be addressed and the way they're gonna address it with like the ambulance receipts transfer, they're gonna only ask for so much, and then there won't be enough money in that fund to make it through the year, but I guess they say they're gonna make an adjustment at the fall meeting, where the funding will come from. I mean, we can't really worry about it, but that's just, it seems like that's their plan.
Going into a budget season and having a deficit, it's mind-boggling to me.
Well, it's, and like I said, they have listed the, and one of the things is, there'll be no revolving account for the veteran services. They've gone back and put in 90,000 that will come from taxation, which is the amount that, we ended up recommending be in there last year.
Yeah.
So, again, all the updated pages from the last joint meeting and what they emailed today with their memorandum of the way they're gonna address certain things and stuff, so you can read through that, and we can try to be as ready as we can be for next Wednesday, which I anticipate will be past 8 o'clock meeting.
This almost goes back to what we talked about, is to give our report, is now you have at this particular time, very close to your pre-town meeting, is we're finally getting to see what they're doing for transfers. And we probably won't see all the motions and everything.
On that note, maybe, but since you popped it into my head, Town Administrator Carter told me last night, I spoke with him a little bit after we were walking out the door. Should have the motions and summaries. We'll probably get them Wednesday, the day of our pre-town meeting. He said he will attend in case there are any questions or anything that comes up, or to assist us in any issues, any questions, or any concerns.
So what are they using for total revenue now, this time around?
Whatever is in that, whatever was in the budget book,
Yep.
you know, they made it pretty clear they were gonna go with their number, and that's, you can sit there and have a throwdown with it, or you can just roll with it, and, you know, you see where you are next year, if they have a lot more,
What did you come up with?
I think if you read one of the the latest, town administrator report, there's a thing in there that, you know, that there's things in this fiscal 18 budget are not sustainable, and not gonna be a good foundation for 19, just because.
So I don't know why they're even doing it this year then. Doesn't make any sense to me. You know,
Well, it's,
because you know what?
it has to be done, I mean, you
It's
can't.
gonna hurt as bad next year as it would have this year.
Right, but you can't do nothing, that's the worst possible thing to do. You have to do something, make a decision and pick a path and go down it, right, wrong, good, bad. But if you do nothing, that's
You
the
keep
worst,
getting run over by
that's
the
the
train,
worst
get the
thing
hell
you-
off the
that's
tracks.
the worst thing you can do. So, I mean, and it is what it is, it's,
You know, Jeffrey?
we don't have much,
You wanna get run over by a train, you get off the tracks.
no, you don't get on the tracks to begin with,
Toot
then you don't
toot.
get run off with the.
You've been
run
on the
over by
tracks
a
too
train.
many times.
I get run over by a bear. Maybe I'll bring him next week.
Good idea.
I'll bring him right in here, you'll lay down. Anybody gets out of line, get him, bear. So, I mean, we know that we have our differences of opinion on a few things in the
mean,
budget, but I mean, really,
Receiving this today
Hey, wait a
in the
minute.
middle of the afternoon, prior to a meeting tonight, doesn't give us much chance that they can even look at this and digest some of this stuff.
What are you thinking?
On this budget overview that he just sent out, the update, the allowance for abatements, is he saying reducing that to 1.5%? Is that the reserve? Is that the reserve account?
The overlay?
The overlay, I mean?
No,
no.
that's the overlay
There is actually a number in there to cover abatements and so forth. I forget where it's in there.
Let me just read something. This is from the Municipal, Department of Revenue, Municipal Finance Glossary. So this is from Revenue Division of Local Services. Overlay. Overlay reserve, which we're talking about, is what he set aside, or allowance for abatements and exemptions.
Yeah.
An account established annually to fund anticipated property tax abatements, exemptions, and uncollected tax in that year.
Okay,
Uncollected tax would be, to me, and I had to read this again to end up understanding it. Uncollected tax would be Temple Stewart's.
Right.
Et cetera. So that probably should be higher.
well, I mean, we were arguing the opposite direction
Right.
recently.
No, we asked about that at one of the meetings, what the abatement and number was. They never included the uncollected tax in that number in that report, because that's what I saw is, you have your levy limit, and that's the number you're gonna base it off of. Because the selectmen were clear, and the administrator was clear that by law, that's the number, and we're not using, what do they call it, looking at the historical trends, we're going off the levy limit.
The actual
You make-
collection rate, they weren't gonna use that. They
Which is
wanted-
fine,
yeah.
you can adjust for that with this account,
Right,
which was the primary account that they attacked when they identified that our question on the revenue was correct. And they made that adjustment. I think it was over 50% of that adjustment came from this account. So I specifically had questioned, can we get that information on the expenditures of that account? What has been our abatement
right.
on the last so
We
many
never
years,
did
to see if we were within it. However, because of the name and that, it didn't show clear to me that it was also counting the uncollected taxes.
Right.
So, at the time, I didn't make anything more of it, because they brought the information in, and it supported his claim that the amount that they still have in there would be sufficient to cover abatements and those type of things. But now, you have to reconsider potentially and say, we need to add in the uncollected amount, because we can work with their income number. We can work with that as long as we account for that on the deficit side, on the expenditure side, with that account.
Let me read the rest of that. It says the overlay reserve need not be Department of Revenue, Division of Local Service, Municipal finance glossary funded by the normal appropriation process, but rather is raised on the tax rate recap sheet.
Thank you.
I'm not following. What does that mean?
It's not funded from a normal appropriation process. In other words, against taxation, raising it through taxation, but rather is raised on the tax rate recap sheet. And I'm confused on that.
Well, if it does cover all uncollected taxes, it had been originally 2.5% of the total real estate value. Isn't that how they figured it? 2.5%?
Pretty much, yeah, it was two,
And then, when they found that they had double counted for the new growth in their revenue, and they backed that out, then they dropped that down to 2%, or just under 2%. So, is that where it is now? Where do we see where that overlay amount is now?
It's down at the adjusted amount,
Adjusted, right.
which was,
I think he moved it to 2%.
that's for abatements,
It was already moved to
2%.
2%.
Yeah.
This is the
Or
latest
2.5.
one here. Did he redo that sheet? Here it is. He's down to 1.5.
It's down to 1.5?
Allowance for abatements is down
Allowance,
to
that's what I was
1.5.
saying before.
Yeah,
So he's gone from
that's the
2 down
place
to
he
1.5.
That's the place that he hit up when they needed it, was,
Yeah.
So they needed an extra 100,000, so he took that,
you take it out of the allowance for
and we're
abatements.
still 100,000.
So now they're allowing for abatements, 135,000,
That's about what historically we had done.
but that's the abatement allowance, and let's see, I think he gave us somewhere, I'm gonna find the thing that he showed us what the amount in abatements typically were, which I don't know if they included uncollected taxes, I
No.
don't think so.
See, and it goes on to say that overlay deficit, and I found this interesting, a deficit that occurs when the amount of overlay raised in a given year is insufficient to cover abatements, statutory exemptions, and uncollected taxes for that year. Overlay deficits must be provided for in the next fiscal year.
Okay?
It also talks about surplus. Any balance in the overlay account of a given year in excess of the amount remaining to be collected or abated can be transferred into this account within 10 days of a written request by the chief executive officer of the city or town. The assessors must provide certification of the excess amount of the overlay available to transfer, if any. Overlay surplus may be appropriated for any lawful purpose. At the end of each fiscal year, unused overlay surplus is closed to surplus revenue. In other words, it becomes part of free cash.
Free cash, yeah. Then that makes this whole discussion about what is our real collection rate
Yeah,
more important, because our collection rate is reflecting everything, right? Abatements, exemptions, and uncollected taxes, right? Can we just spend 5 minutes going over these spreadsheets that I handed out?
sure.
Absolutely.
And,
We have, new business, old business, open issues.
Oh, it was on the, I thought it was on the agenda.
I'm sorry?
Yep.
Yep, we're ready. Which one are we looking at?
The first one, the first page, it doesn't have any notes at the bottom.
Okay.
Let's go through that one first. All right, I apologize for how small it is. I gotta put my glasses on. All right, so you see the tax levy, that's taken right off that's the first line, that's taken right off of the recap sheet. Okay, so that's everything that's available.
Yep.
If we looked at their revenue projection that they used back, the first revenue projection that they used in January 12th, you can see that they had broken out categories of personal property taxes, real estate taxes, new growth, debt exclusion, and capital exclusion, okay?
Yep.
They had line items for personal property taxes and real estate taxes. I'm just focused on the actuals for 2012 to 2016.
Yep.
And you can see they included new growth in there. They double counted it. But they did not, at that time, show debt exclusion,
Okay.
okay? So if you took those total tax revenue amounts, you can see what the tax collection rate is, based on their January 12th projection. All right, so it was 96%, 96, 93,
Yep.
and even 101 in FY 2015.
Yep.
Okay, everybody with me?
Yep.
Drop down to the next projection. This is the one that's currently in the budget book.
Okay.
They added in debt exclusion,
Okay.
okay? So they're double counting new growth and debt exclusion at this point.
God, yeah.
And Kelly confirmed this in one of the joint meetings that went in.
Yep.
She said it's included in the grand total, but, you know, and they weren't gonna back it out,
No.
basically. So if you look at that in totals and figure out what the tax collection rate is, it indicates that we're over 100%
Zipping right along.
of our tax levy every year, if the way they've got it laid out in the budget book currently.
Yep.
All right. So, go down to the next one, the tax collection report.
Yep.
This is what Carter gave to us on April 10th, in which he was showing commitments as being basically the tax levy. And if you compare the commitments to the tax levy, they're close. They're not exactly the same, but it's yet another number that we're dealing with here. And then the amount collected, which he had said at the time hadn't been signed off by the auditors, he came up with collection rates of 97, 97, 95%, and so forth, which is far better than what we had been reporting, right? Because what we had reported back in December was based on a December 19th reconciliation report that the collector's office gave to me. We all have copies of it. That's what I forwarded out again.
Yep.
And showed us what the total amount collected was by year. And that was what we were basing our collection rate recommendation on, because we were seeing 96, 92,
Yep.
you know, much lower percentages, which led us to recommend that we think we should, you know, plan on a 92 or 93%
Yep.
collection rate. Then when Bev gave me my audit report today, I added in what the auditors showed as revenue, and that's that last column, or the last row. And I took that from each fiscal year on the audit report, the page that's, each year had a statement of activities in which they were showing what all the property taxes collected were for that year.
Where page is that on?
I'm looking at page 12 of 47, which is showing me 2013.
Okay.
And if you go down to the bottom, under the general revenues, it breaks out property taxes, motor vehicle and other excise taxes, intergovernmental and so forth, right? And if you look under property taxes, it says for 2013, as an example, we collected $7,459,981.
Yep.
All right, so if I use their numbers
So
and
did you,
compared it to the tax levy, I came up with, again, rates that exceed, in some cases, 100%.
Something wrong.
So, it's just been incredibly frustrating
mean-
trying to figure out what our actual receipts are and
I
come
think-
up with one common set of numbers.
No, we have not collected 100%.
And if we look at these audit reports, and we look at all the other the only other place in any data we've been given that we exceed 100% was where we know something was being double counted. We need to verify something that we're interpreting this audit report correctly, because if we're collecting more than 100% based off the audits,
Where the hell's the money?
yeah, we should be having money each year. How
Yeah.
come we're coming up short?
Yeah,
You know, so, I don't know if we're misreading something here or what, but,
Because if you go to the state website, and that's the financial trend analysis data that we had gotten earlier, that we had gotten as far as the percentages, that was off the state website.
I didn't, not what I reported. What I reported was based on, the advanced reconciliation report.
No. On your, trend monitoring that we did initially,
Yeah,
that wasn't off the reconciliation, that was off of information I pulled off the state website.
no, because I've got it right here. When I was showing what the actual collected was, that was off the reconciliation report. Because at the time, the DOR, I think the latest, year they had was 2013 or
2014.
something. Yeah,
when we look at the tax levy on the top, does that include the new growth?
yes, that's supposed to be, yes.
Because each year they do that tax levy, and then they add on, well, you have your amount, and they add so much as your new growth.
Correct.
Yeah.
Did
And
they,
they add debt exclusion.
Yeah.
is any of these figures included with, like, the money we get from tax title to boost them up?
I sent out that advanced reconciliation report, and that showed everything. That showed tax title, that showed, that,
Yeah, I see. Well, you know what? We ought to get a hold of the guy and tell him, we got a problem, Houston.
well, I would think our benchmark should be
You
the
have
audit
worked-
report.
You have worked so hard that you can't be wrong, because you just have worked too damn hard at this.
Oh, no, I can very, very easily be wrong. I just,
Well, you gotta find out why you're wrong, because I would trust you more than I'd trust anybody else.
well, we've got,
Because you know what? Who the hell knows? Really don't know. Something's wrong.
the fact that we're showing
100%.
4 out of 5 years at being 100% using
something
the auditor's revenue numbers,
Something wrong.
tells me something's wrong. Either we're looking at the wrong tax levy, or,
Somebody, what,
oh, I don't know.
maybe somebody cleaned house. I don't know.
But that's why, this is just to emphasize the point that here we are, we started this in December.
Yeah.
And we're,
Almost
near
May.
the end of April and ready to the annual, and I'm not certain what our real revenue numbers are. If we can't even trust what's in the audit report, then, or if we're not interpreting it right, then, I don't know how we can make recommendations that say the overlay account is insufficient. If we're hovering right around 99, 100%, then we're doing a pretty good job.
Except
And then-
where's the money?
And then 1.5% may be plenty, but
But then, how can they say that they're getting 100% when we know that there's property that they're not collecting?
right.
That begs the point, is
That's why I'm wondering if this is supposed to be the total amount that they were eligible to collect that year with all the new growth and everything?
Yes.
Or the amount they actually collected in this audit report? How do we know which
Well,
number?
It should be this, yeah.
Because they're gonna be able to calculate with the new growth, everything that they're eligible to receive.
Yeah, but.
But
if
we
you don't
wanna see
receive it,
not what
the
we were
hell?
eligible to receive, but what actually came in. And that's what I'm wondering, is this number what was eligible to receive? Because I'd buy that we were eligible to receive, slightly over 100% of what we projected, because new growth was a little bit higher, and excise tax, and some of these other areas came in a little bit higher. But,
Yeah.
you know, so where in this report, is that what this number is? And if not, where in this report is what actually
How
came
much
in
money
that
did
year?
we really get?
Because they had to look at that. I mean,
You'd hope so.
yeah.
But the government finances are a little bit different, because they view every dollar that you're eligible for as money that you will get.
Mm.
So government financing is,
Well, the only one that could end up answering that question is if you call Mr. Rossini there, his telephone number's in the book
I'd call him.
for the company, and ask him, on page such and such, what does this mean?
Yeah, call him. Tell him you're on the advisory board and we looked at his numbers and we have a question.
you've been tasked with identifying our collection rate.
Yeah, because you know what, that's important to me.
Verifying it, we should
I'll
say,
be damned, I don't
verifying it.
wanna approve a budget that's no good.
It's been identified by the town, but we verify.
Fluffy walked on that, I'm sorry.
He's,
Dirty.
oh. No, I'm just looking for the number. You said the
Where's
contact
guys?
information's in here?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
On one of the pages, I saw a telephone number.
okay.
It's at the beginning.
I'll give him a call.
Yeah, call him, cause we paid him enough money. to
Because if we're
call.
collecting that much, then heck, let's put in a new town hall, a new school, a new police, let's just start building. We're
Really?
doing great.
Something wrong.
You really believe that?
No.
Okay.
I said if that's true.
Oh, that's,
And a tooth fairy too,
Gotta
but
listen
then I
to that, yeah.
found out it was a lie, broke my heart. Never recovered.
I see his name. I don't see his number.
I left my book home, I've got enough to lug. Things are heavy,
We'll have to get another vehicle for all the paperwork.
no kidding, huh? Gotta hire a slave,
All those trays.
yeah. I'm getting tired, what else we gotta do? I don't blame Julie for not coming, she gets up at 5:30. Must be exhausted.
Yeah, it's only 8:30.
Huh?
It's only 8:30. I'm
It's
gonna
all
wanna
right.
tear it up for a few hours.
No, go ahead, you poop it up. Don't forget your jelly.
It's in my bag. I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna grab Bear, and I'm going out.
So the question is, in my mind still, what are we gonna do as far as our recommendation for 2018 budget?
I don't
Yeah.
know, I don't know what the real number is.
Things could change again. One of the things that I talked to Mr. Bennett about was that you have pre-town meeting next week, which you have to take and address the warrant. If you, and I didn't talk to him about this, but if we get that information on the day that we get the warrant, and even if the administrator comes in on that night of pre-town, and we're still trying to digest that, we can recess and have the meeting the next day. There is one other Wednesday before annual town meeting, and that's the 10th, where you could finalize your recommendation on the budget.
Yeah, I wanna know what the real numbers are and what we're really collecting.
Well, you won't know that
You won't
until
Well,
you,
if he can call the guy and find out how he figured this,
I
it would
think,
help.
I think at this point, we've collected enough information to know a ballpark range.
Yeah.
Obviously, the information that they're presenting here with some of the additional concerns, basically, they're saying they're gonna have a deficit budget. I can't, I'm having a hard time as a committee out saying, we're gonna support something that we know isn't gonna go through. I'd be more comfortable with saying, we're gonna support a budget, basically a partial budget that, you know, for part of the year, you know. It's, that this budget needs to be, no increased budget, for this year, until at least the fall meeting when they can get that other money that they're talking about transferring. I hate to say that, and I wouldn't turn it into a big thing on town meeting, but how can a committee whose sole purpose is finances, or main purpose is finances, support something that
Showing a deficit.
that shows a deficit? Now, maybe at the meeting, they were better at explaining that I missed on the likelihood of those funds coming in. But if we do something like that, we would have to present how the expenditures would match this lower revenue. We can't just,
Yeah.
because actually, we have like three options on the recommendation. We can recommend yes, we can recommend no, or we can recommend something else. If you recommend no without having some type of
You better clarify it.
reason for why you're recommending no and maybe some suggestion, then you're not really doing the townspeople any good. Some towns have recommended no and said, we are voting no on this, we're sending it back to the selectmen to
out.
come back with a budget. That could be our recommendation, that the
Yeah.
budget come in at this amount, and we're leaving it up to the selectmen as to how to do it.
And
you
let
know?
the department heads explain how they're gonna get there,
Yeah,
and if that means it's a disruption or a reduction in services, identify it.
but we can't, we wouldn't be able to make that recommendation based solely off income. Okay, we know there's a collection rate. What our recommendation would be is that the town spending, section be below a certain amount. And/or that, let's see, where was that section? Because you know that they're not gonna hit the school.
Right.
So you can say, that either the entire budget,
It's gonna be the general, it's got everything out of the general fund.
yeah, right, you wanna hit, you wanna address the general fund, because
Right.
if you make a recommendation in regards to any of the other items, like the total budget, well, they'll just pull it out of the allowance for abatements again,
Right.
So I think if this committee recommends it, you say, having looked at these other areas, we would recommend that the town reduce its general fund budget to this amount.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because basically, they're voting at a final amount,
How
And
they
let-
do it's up to them.
and then let them figure out how to do it. And, we can say that, based off of historic revenue projections, but not be, I guess last year, it was our budget or their budget,
Yeah, that didn't work.
We support what they've done so far, but are concerned about the
Spending
issue,
100% of the revenue.
right, the issue of not having it till fall meeting. At fall meeting, we'd feel much more comfortable supporting this in its entirety. So at this point, we'd like to see
You know,
why.
if we are presenting a budget that we can't, there's no way that it's gonna be sustainable next year anyhow, why would you do what they're doing? It makes no sense to me. If there were gonna be changes, they should have done them this year, after we've been in such trouble. And then they didn't rescind the raises, they did a lot of stupid things to get the town in trouble. How can you give raises when there's no money in the budget for 'em?
Yeah.
Well,
And-
hello,
If they're
So-
saying it's unsustainable next year,
if it's unsustainable this year.
the
So-
reason that they're pushing this budget is for one, and this is my estimation, is for one reason. They wanna end up getting a bond rating. And the issue is still to get the school.
But if we can't,
All the more reason if, I kinda feel like if we,
it's not,
if we say,
Yeah.
we can't endorse it now, we'll come back, in the fall, and then, see where we are, then maybe we can support it. It kinda feels like we're just kicking the can down the road. I mean, if we honestly believe revenue's not gonna come in like they're projecting, And, you know, and this translates to, we think they need to, in the general fund, need to cut 3%.
Well, the reason I'm saying the fall is because in his latest documentation, they're not able to make all the transfers now. And they're gonna have to make some of them in the fall.
Right.
If
So-
there's money there.
But
So
even
rather
with
than-
that,
And rather than, I think that, weren't they proposing that basically right now, we're just gonna take it out of one account? You don't take it out of one account, you take it out of the percentage out of everybody. All the general funds.
I agree, their
But if they're just-
solution so far has been taking it out of the abatement, the overlay account.
Right, but on that transfer from the ambulance reserve receipt, I think I was reading,
Yeah, that's 100% on the fire department.
they're putting 100% on the fire department.
That's
How-
not right.
No, because if they can't make that transfer, now we're gonna have a fire department that's dead broke. You know, that we won't be able to get services from. Instead, you say, okay, we can't make that transfer till the fall. Every single department, we're gonna take basically 100,000. We're gonna divide it, find out the percentage to the general budget, the general government. We're gonna divide it equally, and everybody's budget gets cut by that percent.
Figure out how to do it.
It's a very simple percentage, you know, just boom, it's this percent. It means that this board basically would probably get a percent cut too, but
morning,
I don't know where it would come
Right.
from.
if you don't open here at 7:30 in the morning, and you open at 9 o'clock in the morning, maybe you will make that up. I'd
Well,
love to see,
my
Pete
point is then you
Casper's
leave
here.
it up to them
Yeah,
to
let them
determine,
figure
but
it
say, you
out.
know, it should be distributed
Evenly.
evenly,
Yeah,
because other words, we could put the town into a bad situation if come fall,
we're not,
something, for some reason, they thought they could transfer it now. And that's what they were trying to do, but from what I'm understanding,
Well,
they
they're kicking
learned
the-
they can't.
They're kicking the can down the road in anticipation they're gonna get to school and deal with it in the next year's
Well,
budget.
If you
Which
can,
which could be catastrophic, and you do have to take it, end up, instead of making minor adjustments this year, you have to take it, end up making much larger adjustments in the 19
all
budget.
right, I have a question for you. All the stuff they told people about the police station didn't pan out. All the things that people voted on for the school were not even true. So, my opinion is they should go and revote the whole thing, because what people voted on didn't materialize. So, I don't understand how you can ask people to vote for this, this, and this, and then say, oh, that didn't work, so we'll just do it anyway.
well, they have to get reelected, and the elections happen just before town meeting. So they have to support a budget that's going to appease as many people as possible, and then they can deal with it in the fall when they're not up for reelection, people forget, and then they come to the spring. It's the election
It's
cycle.
just the same sucky way we've been doing business for too long.
But we're not elected, so we're,
That-
we can take the unpopular position and say,
It's the,
Hey, we
it's
think,
the good position for the town in the long run.
Okay.
financial
I'm-
responsibility here is,
I'm going
we think you
fishing
need to
with
cut
the
it
bear.
3%.
Yeah.
All right, on the next, the third quarter financial was emailed out from the
Yeah.
accountant, and it has the revenue stuff and the typical, you know, expenses and what's left in there. I don't know if anybody got to read that, have any issues with it, or,
Are you saying we're gonna finalize the budget recommendations on the 10th?
On the town meeting, I think that the pre-town meeting, when we hit that article, we might have to do it then.
But that, the recommendations going to the town would be something that you presented at the annual town meeting. You could vote,
I meant the pre-town meeting.
right, at the pre-town meeting, you could end up saying, no, we're not gonna take and do this. We think the budget, because of the deficit and this and this and this. But your recommendation that you're gonna present to the town, cause at pre-town, all you're doing is recommending a yes or no and some verbiage. But you have to take and end up supporting that when you talk to the town on your recommendation.
right.
Look at the
So if you're gonna
trans-
say no or some alternative, you have
Right,
to have
right.
some
We could-
backup reason.
You gotta give them
why.
some reasons.
But we could wrap it into that thing and, you know, are you wanting to make a recommendation tonight?
No, I'm saying you can end up we've talked about some issues here, you can end up finalizing it on the 10th when you actually know a little more
Yep.
from the pre-town, when he presents some additional information. Right now, I'm feeling that there's gonna be some information that we don't have now, that's gonna come in the motions and all that stuff at pre-town, the date of pre-town, and I'm just, it seems like we're getting pushed closer and closer to annual town meeting to make recommendations on warrants and budgets without the lack of all the information.
Yep.
I mean, I could be wrong,
But,
but that's my gut feeling.
and that's when we're gonna get the summaries and the motions on.
The summaries and the
May
motions
3rd, at the,
won't happen until next week,
town.
so
Did
things
Paul,
could change.
Figure out how he got his numbers, you know, talk to him? He seemed like a decent enough guy. Tell him you're on the
I
advisory
don't know, I
board.
just,
Yeah, we're getting pushed up against the wall.
that's exactly how I feel. We're up against the wall here at the 11th hour.
Well, I think that's why if we are unable to support it, the recommendation is going to have to be something more general than specific, because I don't see enough time to go through and actually identify each location.
Right,
It's gonna have to be that there's an across-the-board something percent cut,
1%, 2%,
1%, 2%, that we recommend, you know, across the board, 1%, 2% cut to all general things, but,
What Carter
know.
told me and Julie, after the last time we met, he told me that next year we could just close the senior center and that cultural group, we can can them, and he says this budget is not sustainable. And I'm like, well, why in the hell would you present it? You know?
with all the budget that was presented, what they had originally tried to present,
Yep.
did not get enough support by the selectmen. They chose to do something that the administrator and some of the selectmen agree is not sustainable.
Oh, sorry, I'm tired.
So,
Yeah, I know, but you know what? I'm telling you, they'll have the state breathing down their neck if they don't clean up their act and live within their means. It won't be us. And I can't imagine what the people in this town must think. I feel bad because a lot of good people are gonna get blamed for stuff they didn't do because it
if the
sounds too
committee feels that they
general.
wanna wait till pre-town, that's fine. But I'm saying at pre-town, you might end up
Well,
getting,
let's do another
a bigger
meeting the
surprise,
10th,
which
then
you would-
said.
you need to take and end up digesting, and maybe the 10th is you finalize it.
Sounds
Yeah.
like a better.
That's all I'm suggesting.
Sounds like a better idea to me. I don't wanna be sitting there trying to discuss something with people breathing down your neck.
So,
Because we have to have, for the warrant articles, we have to have our recommendations, and they have to be available 2 days before annual town meeting. 2 days before would be the Thursday, Friday, that's 2 days before annual town meeting. So on the 11th, it has to be available.
can we just do our recommendation and following of the bylaws like the selectmen do?
Ignore them?
Oh, is that what I said? I'm sorry.
Is that,
I mean,
Okay.
just, I mean, it's just a question, maybe we could ask if they actually need them for that date.
You want your name on anything, we can have, make Jeff the chairman and he
So-
can.
So
name
you're
the building
recommending that
after
we
you.
get this on the 10th meeting?
yeah,
Yeah,
Was that the one we're doing the pre-town on?
no, the
May
3rd
3rd.
is pre-town,
should be
which
in
is next
the-
week.
what's
You
that?
know,
It
I
should
say
be
that
in
we-
Friday's paper.
Yeah, so if, I say that, you know, come May 3rd, if we're not comfortable and we can still add it to the 10th, we'll know at the 3rd whether or not we can, you know, what we're gonna do, and if the recommendation at the pre-town is that it be
that article be taken care of on the 10th, and we deal with that, because we're gonna have to make it.
Yeah.
And we can, that can
Yeah,
be,
if we just recess, we should be covered.
we can cover everything else,
Because you
we
recess the
can,
annual town meeting, you know, you advertise town meeting on this day, and it, well, was it 12, we recessed for 4 days, 5 days?
Yeah, that was like 3 days, 3 or 4 days.
It went out on a Wednesday, I think.
There
and then
was almost
Friday we
70
met.
articles.
Friday we
we-
met, and we come back Monday with
It was
what
like,
we did on,
it was like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. In the Kiva, I was just,
and then Friday night we met, Selectmen Advisory
yep.
in the Kiva, and then we came back to.
Oh, that
town
was the year
meeting.
before. The 14th is when we,
No, but
no,
we did
that
on
was,
the
that, you're
12th.
right, you're right,
12th.
you're right.
We did that, because
That's-
we had to do all them
Yep,
cuts that night, 144,000?
120,000, and then there's another 20,000 that came off by people making motions, line item adjustments.
So,
sounds good.
all right,
You got that?
Okay. Third quarter
so nothing
report?
with the second, with the financial report, and the town meeting warrant, we do have, it was emailed out. I didn't get the print copies for everybody, I'm sorry, I was late.
It was in- it was in that-
Apparently that's finalized, and that's the warrant, and in that memo, one of those, things that Carter sent out today, about 2:30 or whatever he did, he does say in there that the, summaries of the motions he'll have for our pre-town.
You included it in this packet to us, or did you do that?
Oh, it should be in there.
Yeah, it's right here.
That was the one he printed out?
This was given to me
Yes.
today here at this
Yeah,
meeting.
that's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's printed this for us.
No, I didn't print it out, so.
Yeah, we get the
Oh.
warrant.
Yeah, we have it.
He made copies, and I put it on everybody's,
Yeah.
before you came in, Jeff.
So I gotta tell you, you know,
But he had emailed it out.
Carter's gonna be
Yeah,
gone,
that
we're
in your
still
email.
here.
I've already looked at
We're
it
gonna
there.
do what's right for us.
So that is that finalized, barring any last minute,
It's signed.
yeah.
That's the signed copy, so I would,
Oh, wait, yeah, after it's signed, and voted on, you can't do no changes, I'm sorry.
yeah.
That's it.
Uh,
Right here.
You
in
sure?
Are
this
you going
mess.
to the new business now, Mr. Chairman? New and old
Yeah,
business?
new business, open issues.
I just have a couple things on the new business. I've looked at a number of communities, and I wanted to think and see what everybody's feelings were. They had the advisory committee code of conduct and the statement of roles and responsibilities. If that's something that we should look at and adopt. One of the things that, when you go to the finance committee annual meeting, is they say plagiarize, 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 and then change to whatever you need. So that community, I could end up taking and plagiarizing and change it to something that we have and look at it this coming year.
Does it hurt?
Be helpful. I think bring that in for the upcoming year to get it on there.
And the reason I say this is that there was one issue that was, I know irritated a couple of the committee members, where somebody went out and they publicly said something in the paper and represented themselves as the committee. And that's not acceptable.
I would never do such a thing.
Those are my suggestions, I'm just,
I behave myself.
I can look into that and present it
Yeah, yeah.
next year if we're still
Yeah.
as a committee,
Yeah,
or whatever.
we're all living.
Yeah, well, no, it's not if we're all living, we're all
We're
gonna
all
be,
in this-
given the
We're not
privilege to come.
banished,
Given the privilege to come back, or if we're banished.
banished
I
from
don't
the
even-
flock.
I don't even remember what year I'm in the
You've got one
appointment.
more year.
I think so.
Me too. Banished
I'm
from
gonna
the
get
flock.
banished this year.
Really?
I'm
Are
getting,
yours is up?
I'm gonna be in the corner. I'm not even gonna be allowed to be in the corner.
You're always welcome.
So I'm just, the reason I say that is that I can start pulling some of that together
Yeah,
now.
it's a very good idea,
Present
because
it
I know
after the
people
first of
have
the
gotten
year.
on Facebook and said some
I'll
awful
show you.
stuff about us,
All right.
our own members.
On that note, since there's nothing else,
I'll
and
go home.
unless somebody else wants it, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second,
Hold on.
tired.
Well, I have something I want to discuss, and it's gonna take a while.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna whack you.
Now, we have one, maybe two more meetings, well, three more meetings. A pre-town, maybe a pre-town recess, and then an annual. Then, who
Um,
knows?
Or maybe on the 10th, you don't know.
Well, that's what I said,
Yep.
a pre-town, and then a recess, which would be on the 10th.
I don't care,
Or
spending money
whatever
they
we-
don't have
whatever we come
doesn't
up with.
work.
And then the annual town meeting, and then, we'll see.
The annual, by the way, the annual town meeting, just so, of those folks that have been appointed, such as yourself, Paul, and also Jeff and Julie, your term ends up after the annual town meeting. The appointment is then goes to the moderator to appoint you back on, or
Or not.
or not.
Mhm.
Some of the rest of us are still on till our term ends, again, at the end of the annual,
Banging our head against
the
the
annual town
wall.
meeting.
And if you get appointed, it depends what term you get appointed for, you could be on for multiple years.
Year or three.
Right.
Yeah, it's, I think, 3-year terms, aren't they? But it depends, sometimes if you're filling in, if they appoint you midway through a term, you might only have 2 to fill out.
Well,
the-
no, that was unusual because I believe Jeff and Julie were both appointed for 1 year and they were longer terms that they were filling. Why the moderator did it that way?
don't
I didn't
know,
think they
because-
had the ability to, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
does have that ability.
Yeah, I was midterm appointment, and then I got appointed for
So was I, but
another
they put
year.
me on for 3 years.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. Does anybody wish to talk about anything else? No. Okay, does everybody wanna go home or stay?
Let's go home.
Go home.
Been a long night.
Might as well stay, we're here now.
I second that. Mr. Sprang, it's up to you, the tiebreaker.
I should have brought some wine.
21:04, adjourn.
Adjourned, okay.